to Down Your Unders. Down Your Unders. Review and dissection of content from some of the sharpest minds in the game. Hosted by Adam Camilleri. Art of War. Down Under.
Hello, my lovelies, and welcome to this episode 201 of the Art of War Down Under podcast. My name, as always, is Adam Camilleri. I'm joined by an intrepid and lovely duo, both hailing from the British Isles, so by care of various other locations for Brian. But that being Brian Seipp and Inez Wilson. Hello, gentlemen. Welcome to the show.
Hey, man. Glad to be here.
Hey, Adam. Hello, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Yes, my absolute pleasure to have you both on. And we are here to review the Balanced Dataslate and Minotaurum Field Manual that has come out this last week. So we're catching it not quite on the money because I think it came out last Thursday. This is coming out on the Tuesday, but it is what it is. We're back to our regularly scheduled programming as well. You guys are probably listening to this Tuesday morning, Eastern Standard Time. Has been a bit higgledy-piggledy as I've been unwell and had some travels and some other limitations, but we should be back to business as usual. This is a not insignificant slate, possibly the biggest and most comprehensive that we've had, and truly the moniker that we are playing 10.5 is alive and well, and definitely what I think is the case. Should you want to get more of this goodness from these two wonderful gentlemen, come over and join us on part 2 over at Patreon, Art of War Down Under. We're going to be doing some hot takes and answering a slew of listener freaking questions. There is quite a few there, but quite a few double ups. So join us over there if you so please. But we're going to go straight into it and get some hot takes, starting with Brian. Mate, how you feeling about this 10.5? Good, bad, or otherwise?
I think it's great overall. I think the changes are a net positive for the game. I think there's a couple factions, as we'll get into later, that are unfortunately catching a bit more of the hands than other ones. Probably a bit unfairly too. But I think that's the result of overall game changes that are net positives for everyone's gaming experience.
Fantastic. Inez, what are your hot takes?
Yeah, I think overall, basically everything that changed was for the better. I think there's a couple of things that are maybe could have gone further, a little things that maybe went a little bit too far, but everything seems like it's done a pretty good job of normalizing everything back towards that sort of middle range where you feel like you can, even if not everything is equally viable, that you feel like you have a chance with almost everything you could play. I'm really sorry, Deathwatch players are. But
neglect is the word for Deathwatch, and seems as just as planned neglect. I've got an interesting take on this. The state of the game wasn't so bad that I felt like it required this extent of an overhaul. Like, we're not talking about double speed Ynnari times of 8th edition, or even the second Space Marine book, so to speak, or even points of 9th edition where we're in the doldrums of Drukhari and Admech ad nauseum for what felt like a year, but it's more like 6 months. And we've had a much bigger reaction to the state of the game that we were in, despite I think the state of the game not being as bad as it has been in the past. So whether this is going to come out as a net overreaction, we will have to wait and see. But the fact that they've done more than any previous slate to bring up the bottom and make things that were performing poorly more dynamic, and more interesting, notably Admech and Tyranids being the two there, I think that is overall definitely a net positive. Does that resonate with you boys as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think we were in a pretty balanced state before, but I think that's also a bit of a side effect of just Games Workshop doing a better job balancing overall. I mean, we're starting to see just generally a more balance for longer periods of time game-wide, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on that. I think in a general sense, I think there's, outside of exactly, I think CSM, who were kind of getting their first balance update, all of the top level, major changes to the best armies were fairly light. Like Thousand Sons and Necrons definitely came away reasonably lightly compared to what we've seen for other top armies in the game before, which does result in it feels like it's more of a normalization to that the ideal being 53 to 47 rather than 55 to 45, right? Just compressing that everything a little bit more because we were in such a good state that we could take a smaller approach but a wider approach, right? Hit more things but with less ferocity for the top end and more buffs for the lower end.
All right, our rhythm for this review of the Balanced Dataslate, which is where we'll be starting, is I'm going to read pretty much everything. We have two incredible guests joining us, and I don't want to waste any of it. So I'll be reading a thing, bouncing it to one of these gentlemen, and then getting their opinion and moving on. We're starting off with the modifying of a stratagem CP cost. Rules that enable you to target a unit from your army with a stratagem for 0 CP, but do not specify the name of the stratagem, e.g. a spaceman captain's rite of battle. Instead, reduce the CP cost of that use by 1 instead of making it free. If a model has a rule that would once per battle increase the CP cost of an opponent's stratagem, e.g. Callous Assassin, that rule is replaced with the following ability, which is the Lord of Deceit Aura. Each time your opponent uses targets a unit from the army with a stratagem, if that unit is within 12 of this model, increase the cost of the command point usage by 1. Inez, kick us off, mate. What do you think of this change, and is it good?
Yeah, I think overall good change. Does some good things with getting rid of like double battle tactics being really obnoxious in a few books, and also cleans up the books just having like bad rules based on the fact that they didn't have any good battle tactics. I think the key example is Ork Champions for Custodes. Just not having any really good examples of a thing you could do with that made the shield captain, who was meant to be one of the cores of that detachment, just not feel like he was doing his job. Whereas now he really kind of does. And then it also kind of addresses the same end of feeling like you're just getting scammed because your stratagem is a battle tactic. The example I always hated here was Armor of Contempt for 2 Space Marines and True Silver Armor for Grey Knights, which is the same stratagem but a War Gear stratagem, which meant that you couldn't hit it in that matchup. It was always just one of those sometimes you bring this data sheet and it's amazing, sometimes you bring it, it's terrible, and it just normalizes that to if you're playing close range, you're going to suffer against it. If you're trying to play longer range or you're playing more fair stratagems, it's unlikely to hit you. It's going to hit damage and output stratagems and flexibility stratagems more than utility stratagems now, which I think is a better place for it to be.
So the Lord of Deceit aura is pretty much Cypher's aura that he had on his data sheet. Am I remembering that correctly? And if that is the case, now that's just everyone's such ability. Brian, is that a good change for many things? Does that actually assist some armies, or is that just making a Calidus worse or better?
I think that it's an incredibly powerful ability, and I think it's it's much better. I think specifically for the Calidus, it might be a slight nerf because she's so squishy. But when you compare it to some other things, like for example, I don't know, the Swarm Lord, who is a much tougher body that has a similar effect, and you consider things like a combat mirror or a combat situation, and you jam somebody like that in the middle of this situation, and now suddenly your final deaths are 3 CP, your interrupts are 3 CP, your armor contempt is 2 CP. It just it can really throw a spanner in the works in a really interesting way. So I think it's a really, really powerful ability.
I think it's a very much a positive change as well, because I mean the Calidus Assassin essentially never saw combat. It was something that was jumping up and down every turn, usually in the backfield, until you pulled such a card that it was worth trading her out. And after she'd used that ability, now that ability needs to be something that's mixing it up in the pivotal parts of the game to generate value. And I think overall it's a positive use for those parts of your army. And I think it's a really good change, to be honest. All right, moving on. Stratagems that can be used more than once per phase/turn. Parts of a rule allow a player to use stratagems even if they've already targeted another unit with said stratagem in the same phase, can only be used if the name of the stratagem is specified in the rule. Similarly, if a stratagem is limited to one use per player turn, like Overwatch, per battle round or per battle, such parts of that rule can only be used if the name of the stratagem is specified. Brian, what does this actually mean? That's a lot of words. Give us an actual example of how this will change the game.
So this is tied to the change before, where you could reduce the cost of a stratagem to 0 CP. A lot of times you saw these were tied with abilities that did what's commonly referred to as echoing. So that would be, you can do a stratagem, reduce the cost to 0 CP, and also do it a second time, like Armor Contempt, for example. You could use it in 2 places at once if you had, say, like a captain that had this rule. What this is saying here is that all of those abilities no longer exist. You can no longer echo. So your captain can reduce a stratagem by 1 with the change from before, but it can't echo anymore. And I think that is a positive change as well. I think you saw a lot of instances where, again, to Ennis's point before, with the hat won the lottery and got a really good battle tactic, it was extremely powerful, that ability. And other times it would be much weaker because they didn't have a good one. And so now you can't echo anymore, and it reduces the cost for everything. It's just overall, I think it's a more balanced and kind of smoothing out of that ability game-wide in a really positive way.
Yeah, totally agree. All right, stratagems that prevent units from being targeted. This is I can TLD this one down very easily. Essentially, if you have any stratagem that would give you the loan up ability, that loan up ability is changed to be in line with the Nurgle strat from Chaos Space Marines, as in it is no longer the 12-inch, cannot be targeted, is now an 18-inch not be targeted. And that is just blanket everything in the game that has that ability. So this is actually a quite a decent nerf to the Canoptic Court, which was frustrating as hell when someone would reactive move and then loan up, and then it would just cook so many interactions. Inez, is this another positive change for the game?
Yeah, broadly, just it makes every army feel a little bit more interactable. You can still deal with the long range shooting. Like you can keep something safe from manticores or a Leman Russ that's sitting 70 inches away from you, but you can't deal with like getting aggressively pressured. Basically, you can't force somebody to come into your charge threat range. Now you can like actually get dealt with from usable ranges, and it's still an incredibly powerful ability to play around lots of things, holding objectives and all that. But it doesn't just blanket no sell medium range shooting armies.
But why point out guard like that? Why hurt guard like that? Why attack me on my show, Inez? Like, did you have to?
Yeah, actually, I did. It was vital. I will note one cool thing. Specifically, it's only 12-inch loan up abilities. So the Tyranid Vanguard stratagem that gives you 6-inch loan up is unaffected, as long as you're already a loan operative, which I do think is quite nice.
I think it's good because I like that they have there's something that is unique, and Tyranids definitely need a little bit of juice. All right, stratagems that add new units to your army. If a stratagem has the effect of adding a new unit to your army that is identical to a destroy unit, a la the guard one, add the following restrictions to the stratagem. You can only use once per battle. This is a huge nerf to a myriad of different builds, Unending Swarm being one of them, every guard army that I've already pointed out being another. Starting with you, Brian, how big of a deal is this? And does this just take a bunch of horde armies out of contention?
I think that it dramatically changes the discussion about them. And this is the first of those kind of things that I think we're going to see here where game-wide changes are starting to hit guard in an unfortunate way that they maybe didn't need. But I think that it's a hugely positive thing for the game overall, because these stratagems are very, very difficult to balance, right? Whenever time you give somebody the ability to just play with more points than your opponent, you have to then jump through a ton of hoops trying to make sure that those things that can come back are balanced. And Guard was really good at exploiting this, for example, with Khazarkan, which was a very strong unit that they then got to bring back over the course of the game 5-6 times if you really wanted to, if you were aggressive, and suddenly you're playing a 2,600 point game versus your opponent's 2,000 point army, and that's not great. So
fair,
good change.
Inez, who does this hit apart from guard and Nids?
I'm not actually aware of any other stratagems that do this.
The big one's Kroot, I think.
Oh, Kroot is the other one. Yeah,
because
that one just came out.
Yeah, that's a great point.
That definitely
is there a recursion in CSM? Does CSM have recursion in like the Horde build, the cultist build?
Don't think Cult has recursion, and none of the other ones do.
I don't think I do. So either way, this is a bit of future proofing as well, because you can only assume there's going to be more of these added to the game than there are now.
Yeah, I can't wait for the Space Wolf one that recurs Thunderwolf Cavalry. I'm sure that'll...
Man, that would be a good strat. Yeah. Like, even if it's once per game, that is a baller strat. If you recur 6 Thunderwolves, that'd be ridiculous. All right, we're into the faction changes. Adeptus Sororitas, none, because they've just got a brand new book, and GW is on brand, and with consistency being, there's nothing egregious there. The faction FAQs will sort anything out for the time being. Adeptus Custodes, Shield Host Detachment, Martial Mastery Detachment Rule, change the first paragraph to read. At the start of the battle round, you can select one of the bullet points below. If you do, until the start of the next battle round, that bullet point affects your army. And then we're just going to do this all together. The Ork Champions Detachment, Assemblage of Might Detachment Rule. At start of your command phase, select one unit from your army. Until the start of your next command phase, each time model in a character unit from your army makes an attack that targets an enemy unit, add 1 to the wound roll. So 2 not insignificant changes. The Shield Host one is actually pretty good, but break it down for us, Brian. Is this a big change to Custodes, and how up the tier list is this going to take them, if anything?
I think it's a huge change for Custodes. That first one being that detachment effectively just gets to get crit hits on 5s with sustained or lethals whenever it wants over the course of the game, which is just dramatically improves somebody's efficiency. And then the other one, obviously, there's a lot more character units than models that you're attacking. Custodes were in a really bad place This makes them interesting, at least. I don't know if it's enough. We'll have to see it combined with maybe some points changes and see where they land. But it's definitely a nice leg up for sure.
Yeah. A lot of people were saying that with a lot of the battle line changes, plus possibly this, plus possibly an FAQ, plus possibly points, we could see Custodes start to rocket up in power again. I don't think that the sum total of their changes is going to be the case, but they're definitely going to go from a bottom army to a middle army, I believe. Inez, does that hold true for you?
Yeah, I think that's basically where I have them as well. I think between the sort of core rules devastating wounds change, where they now just deal mortal wounds again, making Talons of the Emperor a little more flexible, where it has its 5 field plating against mortal wounds all the time, and then Shield Host having now effectively crit 5s the entire game or plus 1 AP if you feel like you're doing enough damage. And then also having a stratagem for a field plating against mortal wounds.
Yep.
You now have a little bit more of those defensive tools that you were kind of lacking in Custodes before, where it felt like the army kind of just fell apart exactly outside of Wardens. When you add in some of the points drops that they got, particularly I would say to Venatari, and the battle tactic change that we just covered, making the characters a little bit more flexible. There's a lot there for Custodes. I think you can compellingly play the army now, and you will be playing a normal game of Warhammer against basically everything that you come up against. Yeah, it might be a little weaker. You might have some bad matchups still, but you're not just going to show up and lose the game for showing up.
Yeah, correct. I guess the biggest issue was a lot of people pointed out how well-rounded the index detachment was, and then the index detachment got shattered into a million pieces and distributed all the best parts through various other things. And now at least the shield host feels like it's very good at a couple of things again, and it has some defensive oomph around it. Next up, we have Adeptus Mechanicus, who is essentially a brand new faction. They have completely been rewritten. I'm actually maybe going to piss some Admech players off, all 3 or 4 of you, or a bunch of Admech curious players. And I'm not going to read this out word for word because I intend to do an entire episode on Admech, because like I did with Drukhari, when they get the new detachment, I feel like there is enough meat here that it warrants its own episode, and you guys and the Admech players deserve to have their time in the sun. But I will flip it over to Brian and then Inez for their TLDR of this and how good this is for Admech. So Brian, take it away.
So, I mean, the long and short of it is I, much like many, I think, players, don't fully understand Admech, which is a privilege that I hope to extend for as long as possible. But I think that overall, this is just some strong and obvious raw power increases here. Granting army-wide extra ballistic skill or AP, having abilities that trick off a battle line in a new mission pack that heavily relies on battle line. It's all positive changes. Weapon profiles having glow ups, both in melee and combat. I mean, it's overall just it's a really positive glow up change. It's hard to see how it all kind of fits together, especially coupled with some of the points changes there. To see where the faction ends up landing, but it's definitely better than they were. I think is the easiest takeaway.
I think undeniably, like, brand new. It was always so weird that their faction identity became much more what I think of as Imperial Guard, as in here's a bunch of mechanized stuff, maybe a tank or 2, and then here's just a bunch of dudes to go and do actions. Nothing inherently itself is very deadly, and you need to put a bunch of different combos and a bunch of different things together to get something going. Where to me that feels like Imperial Guard, Astra Militarum. But now it feels like they've actually got an identity. They're actually a thing. Inez, what are your hot takes on Admech?
Yeah, I think Admech, along with the other 7th edition Codex of Gene Circles, have suffered quite strongly from not really having an identity for a long time, in that they were just kind of slotted into the rule set and have either had like very variable power levels, and this does a pretty good job of correcting what has kind of become the Admech problem that they're not. I don't think Admech were that bad before the Balance Slate. They were like certainly not amazing, but what they were was incredibly difficult to put on the table compellingly because the models were expensive and they didn't really do very much. So there was a lot of just, you put hordes of idiots on the table and you kind of played like an endless swarm without being endless swarm approach to them.
Yeah.
With like a little bit of damage core, you might have had, your core squads of breachers and things like that were very good at doing damage in the right circumstances. And all this has done is just said, you can build your Admech army in such a way that you have like the ability to have damage output in a couple of turns. You can have a couple of turns of ballistic skill, then transition that into a couple of turns of weapon skill, and then you can have either like better EP or better like defensive profile with -1 to hit, and you have like the ability to actually pressure your opponent and do something to them and actually interact with the game in more of than a just I'm going to shoot you with hordes of idiots and hope to chip enough wounds off you that I can deny you primary.
Yeah.
It was really, really dull. When you couple that with the call change, which now makes him battle line, for anybody who doesn't know, Admech have an absolute host of battle line keyworded abilities. So things like Cerberus Raiders have a reactive move that's flat, that moves flat 6 or flat 12 when they're near battle. I think it might be D6 and 6, but You have the Caster Front Breachers, which are one of the most powerful units in the army that get full rerolls when next to battle line, making that on a lone operative that has decent melee. Like, he's not world beating, but he's enough counter charge that if somebody like tags your Breachers, they're at least going to suffer for it. And provides a whole bunch of just like abilities to the army that you kind of had to work really hard for before. So you can lean into using your troops for what you want to use them for, which is going aggressively, denying primary. Vanguard reduce OC by 1, so you can jam them into your opponent, turn off their ability to do actions, like all this kind of really cool stuff, and just really shut them down while backing it with enough damage from the newly buffed damage output priests that now feel like they're worth their points because they actually do something rather than just paying for the chassis and doing nothing. Paying 75 points for one las cannon shot wasn't all that interesting.
No.
Paying 85 for 2 is a lot more interesting because once you get past that cost of the chassis, you have diminishing returns on the amount you're paying for the extra shot, which I think it puts Admech in a much more compelling place. And I really look forward to hearing what some of the better Admech players have to say about this, because from where I'm looking at it, this seems like it could be one of the better armies in the game, sort of like top half. But I think it will always suffer from a low play rate just because the way the army is, and it's a newer army in a 40k sense, which always means that there's lower play rate with stuff like that usually.
Yeah. All right, moving on to Eldari. What has changed here? It's actually hard for me to remember. Okay, so Strands of Fate is exactly the same as the previous change, that being we have 6d6 now. Fate's Messenger, same as previous. Phantasm, same as previous. Eldred,
I don't actually think there are any Dataslate changes here.
No change for Eldar.
Yeah, all right, moving on. Adeptus Mechanicus. No changes. Astra Militarum has some significant changes. Voice of Command Army Rule. If your faction, Astra Militarum, officer models with this ability can issue orders. Each officer data sheet will specify how many. The change, of course, it's exactly the same as when they can arrive from reserve and disembark on transports and issue orders. But here's the big one. Combined regiment change. Born Soldier Detachment Rule. Each time a regiment unit from your army makes a range attack that targets a visible unit that isn't a monster or vehicle, you have lethal hits. And then each time a squadron unit makes an attack that targets a monster or vehicle, they have lethal hits. So no more standing still to get your lethals, which only really benefited indirect. Now, regiments, anything that's not monster vehicle, and squadron, anything that is monster and vehicle, get the lethal hits. So Sentinels get both, because I believe they're the only thing that are both. But this is a big change, and this is, I believe, noting that a bunch of things got nerfed for Astra Militarum. Brian, how do you feel about this?
I think this is great. It adds a lot of lets guard play more dynamically. The detachment before really forced them into a play style that, while effective, was fairly linear and fairly limiting. This rule change specifically, instead of going from, hey, you really only want to use your rule with indirect, to now being you only get your rule if it's not indirect, because you can't get that rule unless you can see the unit. Just kind of encourages you to do a lot more interesting things, like take more Leman Russes, look at more direct fire infantry. It just makes your army generally more dynamic, which is awesome. And it's a powerful rule. I mean, lethal hits detachment wide is just generically really powerful. So that's really cool.
And thank you very much for pointing out that because I did TLDR this. It says visible unit, so none of this benefits artillery at all. Indirect fire, that being at all. It does benefit straight line artillery. Inez, what does this do for guard overall? Because there are things coming that will even further nerf indirect. Does this give them a little bit of juice back, or is this just not even touching the sides compared to what they've lost?
I think this strongly pushes you towards playing a much more interactive game, right? It's still range attack limited, which does mean it doesn't help some things like Rough Riders and Bulgrin, which I think you maybe could have gotten away with letting them do that. But I think giving you the ability to do things like the full reroll Scion Squad that already has sustained hits and giving them lethal as well. Things like the Primaris Psychers can ride about in tanks and get a decent amount of damage out of them now with lethal hits. There's lots of interesting things you can do with it now that encourages a much more interactive playstyle. And I think this is going to be a lot easier to balance, is the other side of it.
Yes, correct.
Where if this army is too weak, you can reduce costs on things. Whereas, when you had it the previous, it didn't really matter how much you made mana cores expensive. If they were the best in class shooting unit, you ran them. Whereas now you start asking, do I want mana cores, or do I want a Leman Russ that can do more damage if it can get to the situation, but I have to set it up? Do I want to run Rogaldorns that actually have a little more interesting dynamics to them now, because I don't feel like I'm pressured into playing indirect to make use of my rule? And I think that overall for guard, even if it's not necessarily stronger, which I don't think it will be on balance, I think it'll be a little bit weaker than they were to start, it will be much more engaging for guard players, engaging for guard opponents, and easier to balance in the next points update in 3 months' time. Which obviously
totally agree.
Small benefit for the time being, but I think if you were going to play guard, this just gives you a new and more dynamic way to play them.
Give me 45 Scions, 100%. I am ready for that life, and I wish I had them ready to go. But anyway, moving on, we have Black Templars. 2 changes here, which echo changes that we'll see for Space Marines. Also, impulsors and repulsors have had their transport capacity increased from 6 to 7, and then from, I can't remember it was 10 or 4 or 12 to 14 for the repulsor. This is huge. I've wanted this for so long. It has been so awkward to try and put a decent unit with a character in impulsor. Notably, Blade Guard, of course, you can never put a Blade Guard unit and a character in. 2 units of Eliminators was the best you could do.
Well, you could have paid even more for a Blade Guard if you really wanted to. You run a 5-model squad and hate yourself.
I did that. Literally did that. I put a Blade Guard Ancient and 5 Blade Guard paying for the 6th so that I could get the Impulsor dead, have them disembark and be auto battle shocked with the better Feel No Pain from the Unforgiven task force. And it was dumb as hell. I never did it again. But this is a big change, and we're happy to see it. We'll talk about this more when we get to Space Marines because there's no point talking about it twice. So Blood Angels has not changed. Still +2 strength and a +1 attacks for the Sons of Sanguinius detachment. Chaos Knights, Super Heavy Walker. This will be red once and not red again for Imperial Knights because they had the same thing. Essentially, breaking it down, it can move with Super Heavy Walker ability. It can move within engagement range of enemy models, but can't end that move within engagement range of them. It can also move through sections of terrain features that are greater than 4 inches. But if it does, roll a d6, and on a 1, you are battle shocked. I don't know why this doesn't just say take a battle shock test, but here we are. They decided to be funky, soupy, spicy, and snowflakey about it. This is freaking huge. Much bigger for Imperial Knights than Chaos Knights, even though there are some point changes to Chaos Knights that do make their big knights a little bit more palatable. I still don't think it's going to touch much of the size of Chaos Knights, but this just in general, Brian, how big is this for big knights and the Super Heavy Walker ability? Are we going to see more big knights?
I think it certainly makes them at least viable. I mean, before they were rather hard to activate on WTC boards. Even with the Titanic change, they sometimes struggled. Now they can actually move about the board much easier, especially when you couple this with some. We'll discuss later with the movement changes. They just become much easier to use overall, which is both a huge quality of life improvement for Knight players and also just generally effective. I mean, the Knight platforms were always really powerful when it comes to their output. It was activating them that was sometimes a challenge. And this rule directly helps that.
Inez I mean, obviously, you're probably on the same path as me. I think this isn't going to be a huge change for Chaos Knights, apart from the fact that I think a single Rampager is hilarious now.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the Rampager makes out like a bandit from this change. Being able to set, someone in the Seipp Discord was talking about six carnivore triple Rampager as a 2000 list, and just every turn it's just 2 carnivores, Knights of Shade, and the Rampager goes.
Correct.
And you're just turn 1, turn 2, turn 3. Can you deal? And frankly, that sounds hilarious to run an RTT sometime, and it's probably fairly reasonable in singles as well. I think there's a little bit of like Chaos Knights have the best single big knight that isn't Canis Rex in the sense that they have the armor contempt enhancement for a big knight. So if you want to run like a Knight Despoiler with like a thermal cannon and a chainsword and have it be just like a midfield bully in your list now, like the fact that this works on allies as well. It does make like bringing a single Chaos Knight a lot more engaging. It makes playing it alongside War Dogs pretty engaging. Like you have a lot of cool things you can do with that now. To just give you that almost guaranteed threat range. You're just, I can walk 10, I can shoot you. I've been playing a Lord of Skulls in Souls of Cogs of Ashtor, whatever it's called, Soulforge Warpack for a bit, and it's the same kind of idea, right? It's a thing that you can interact with. You can peek the tiniest angle with the Titanic model, make your opponent come to you to see you, and then jump through a wall and charge them. And that's really hard to engage with sometimes, and it's very powerful.
I was frustrated. I was frustrated when I saw the essentially the Grey Knight nerfs and then the Grey Knight buffs when the 6DK Canis list, because Canis is actually so much better in that list now than he was, because you got Dread Knights jumping up and down, getting angles, and this Canis just yeeting straight at you on a chosen turn is pretty hilarious with not much way to stop him. But this is a huge change. Everyone needs to know about this. Can definitely still block out problem areas because of course they can't land their base on things, so you can block out, staging points and prevent them from getting into the positions where they're going to be really aggressive at you or get the right angles. So this isn't a ubiquitous unga bunga, I can do whatever I want, but it is much improved. So a really, really good take there, and we'll see if it pushes Imperial Knights up the scales. I don't think it's, like I said, apart from I agree with you. The Rampager is so attractive now. I think I'm letting go of the Lancer and War Dog build, and I might try the Rampager at an event coming up.
Wow, the Lancer losing out on big tank shock definitely.
Yes,
a little bit as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. All right, Chaos Space Marines up next. One change to Warp Talons. They must destroy one or more enemy units to do their jumpy backy into reservey thing. This is coupled with what I'm going to tell you right now, massive points hike on Warp Talons. Definitely takes them off the I will play 30 if I own them list to maybe you take 5 or 10 because they still do something that's very unique. Brian, do you think Warp Talons are still viable? Is this enough to put them on the shelf automatically, or do you think they're still a playable unit?
No, I think they're still very playable. With this design, they're just maybe not faction defining like they were before.
Yeah, meta defining.
Exactly. They serve a very cool and interesting role. To your point, as you said earlier, they have a really unique ability. You just can't do some of the more egregious things you're able to do before, like dogpiling one unit with multiple Warp Talons and then vanishing into the smoke after you had done so. Now you've got to be a little more careful. They're serving kind of a more focused role of dealing with screens and small scoring elements, but they're still the best thing I've seen in the game to do that, even with this change.
Yep, agree. Makes them a lot more susceptible to things like armor contempt, makes them a lot more susceptible to other defensive stratagems to keep the Warp Talons on the table, fall back and pick them up. But the fact that there is interplay and they're not a truly uninteractive piece, I think is for the best. All right, Chaos freaking Demons. Shadow of Chaos Army Rule, Demonic Terror. Whilst an enemy unit is in your Shadow of Chaos and or is within 6 of one or more Bloodthirsters, Grand Clean ones, all the Greater Demons, even the name Greater Demons. Each time a unit takes a battle shock test, subtract 1 from the battle shock test. If they fail, D3 mortal wounds. This is part of a conglomeration of changes, which I can TLDR pretty quickly for you. But I'll read out the Demonic Pact one next. In addition, for each of the following keywords, the number of non-battle line units... That's just the previous change, the one that says, you can't just take infinity characters and, loan up stuff, blue scribes, etc., without taking an offset unit. And then here comes the big stuff, the Demonic Incursion Detachment. Ostensibly, everybody knows Be'lakor, even though he was, in my opinion, a pile of crap data sheet, he had an ability that was worth, the 350-odd points you were paying for him because he gave an aura of Shadows of Chaos and was an enabler for the rest of your army. Now, every single graded demon is that ability for things of the same god. So that's Bloodthirsters with Blood Crushers. That is, a Beast of Nurgle with Great Unclean Ones. They will get a, closer deep strike from an aura off every single one of your greater demons. This, I believe, is a great change for the Mono God Enjoyer. Actually may make Mono God good. And the fact is, if you were taking an army that had, Be'lakor, 2 or 3 greater demons, well, just yeet Be'lakor straight out of that list and you have 350 more points, because I really hate Be'lakor. I always thought he was a pile of crap, and I hated that demon players had to play with him because I understood that he was a necessary evil. And so many times he just would do nothing all game, and you were just so disappointed for the demon player. Inez, how big a deal is this change, and will it see any change for the demon player?
Oh yeah, this is huge for demons. It opens up a ton of playstyles. I definitely think you can still play Be'lakor. Like, he's still a completely reasonable ability. The Lone Opera 18 is still faction defining in a lot of ways, and it opens up the option to not bring him now if you don't want him. Be'lakor did also go down in points this update, which means that he is pretty reasonable now. 325 is still expensive, but manageable. But you can now do things like have like a Bloodthirster into Scarbrand into Blood Crushers popping out of
Crushers
in like a chain Blood Crushers, into like a chain wave of deep strikes. You can do Shalaxi advancing up the board using the advance and charge stratagem now, because all of demon stratagems key off of being in shadow, or almost all of them, which means that you can always pick up 2 things. You can always advance and charge a greater demon, all those kinds of things. So you can do like Shalaxi advances up the board, brings in a Keeper Secrets next to her. Keeper Secrets then brings in a Seeker Squad. Seeker Squad charges your opponent's garbage. Keeper Secrets goes in and charges a real thing. Shalaxi advances and charges into the last thing and kills the world, because that's Shalaxi. It opens up a lot of different Monogo builds. It also opens up, like, if you want to play some of the more synergy-based stuff in demons, I think specifically Khorne and Slaanesh have a ton of that, where like the Mask is really good at buffing up stuff for demons with the +1 to wound, and the Ren Master for Khorne really good at giving that +1 strength, AP, and damage. Like the two of them combined, you can now probably fit both packages in your list because you don't need to run Be'lakor. And yeah, you don't have like two armies that are like synergistic. You have two halves that contribute to a whole, and then you might have like the Endless Gift, Feel No Pain, 4-up Feel No Pain, Great and Clean One, who now just always has a 4-up Feel No Pain, backing that up in the spot where you maybe would have needed to have Be'lakor before. And you can kind of have that independent synergy, or you can mix it all together by still including Be'lakor, and then you can like make your choices based on what's got good advancing charges this turn. You know, maybe you use Be'lakor because Be'lakor was on the board somewhere and your Bloodthirster's already in good position, and he can go and do something else. And now but now you have the choices, so it stresses your opponent's resources away from just being like, we'll just focus Be'lakor or stay away from him so he can't do his stuff, into, well, which of them do I deal with? And then you give your opponent decisions to make, and that introduces the ability for them to make mistakes, for you to make good plays, and it gives demons much more flexibility in that kind of general thing. The other side of this is obviously the leadership aura for your opponent, -1 to Battle Shock, and D3 wounds when they fail. Battle Shock is not a mechanic that doesn't exist in the game, and there are some stratagems in demons that like there's a full wound rerolls if your target is Battle Shock, and just having access to that for some of the lower strength stuff like Keepers of Secrets is not nothing. It's unlikely to help much, but when it does, you'll appreciate it. And also you get the healing when you pass Battle Shock tests, which again, great for greater demons when they go low. Healing D3 wounds on a Great and Clean One might as well be an insurmountable amount of damage on times.
It's disgusting. Brian, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think the idea of a nest of nesting dolls of greater demons is fantastic. I think the army still has some fundamental issues that it struggles with, but I think that this is a huge improvement and adds a lot of new ways of playing the army from that one detachment, which for any demon player is going to be a massive boost. There's a lot of room for innovation.
Yeah. I really wish they did something in addition for their battle line units, because outside horrors and at times plague bearers, all their battle line units suck. And even the two I just listed suck a lot of the time also. So I wish they did something to make their battle line more palatable in addition. Oh, sorry, in a mission pack that's very battle line friendly.
Fair, but I think there's always a little thing with demons to point out that demons do sit at like a 50% win rate pretty consistently, while being like reasonably decent in terms of like converting top fours, not so much converting wins. From the privileged position that we're sitting in, I don't tend to play against demons a ton. They're not a list I see a lot, but I know that there are a lot of people who struggle against them. And buffing the army by making it like stronger rather than making it deeper would have been maybe too much in that situation. This opens up more options for demons, but it doesn't necessarily give you more raw power in an army that was already doing fine there, if maybe not at the top level, but compared to the rest of the circuit, it was doing fine. It maybe didn't need to get raw damage increase because it's already, winning games off of the power of 3-inch deep strikes and things like that. So maybe that's a thing that can come in the future if it doesn't get better or if it gets worse. But I think right now, power level wise, demons were in an okay spot. They just needed more options to get away from the mono build of Be'lakor, basically.
Yeah, agreed. Good pointing out that it may have been OTT as well. Dark Angels up next. Grim Resolve, which is the Unforgiven Task Force detachment rule. You get to, in your command phase, add 1 to the objective control characteristics of models in a chosen unit. That is kind of cute. I don't think it is enough to make the Unforgiven Task Force better than, say, a Gladius. But it is kind of cute. If you are dedicated Dark Angels player and you love the detachment, that's just a straight buff. It's just more than you had before, so that is good.
Excuse me, Adam. You can make a Storm Raven do actions now.
Shush. Don't tell people that nonsense that other people will not let them do, or a TO will not let them do. But technically, that is correct.
It would be OC1. It's perfectly capable of doing actions.
Well, if you still take a Storm Raven with the points hikes and the change, actually, crap. Yeah, you're right. I knew you could do that. I just didn't consider that you would want to do that in the Unforgiven Task Force. But
okay, doing it with Guilliman.
It is, fair. Not that you can take Guilliman in this detachment anyway. But you mean the Lion, which is also cute. But yeah, this is pretty funny. And when you want this ability, it will, get you some points in a game. Could be good for 5 or 10 points a game if used very well, because it is in your command phase, and we know when you generate points and all those things and flipping objectives and such. So yeah, but the bigger changes is the Inner Circle Task Force. Their vowed target detachment rule has changed, which before was pick any objective on the table and you get +1 to wound against things on that objective. It is changed to be at the start of your movement phase, select one of the following: defensive footing, Select one objective marker you control until the start of the next movement phase. That's now your vowed objective. You get the +1 to wound on it. Aggressive push is the other option. Select one or more objective markers that you do not control until the start of your next movement. Until the start of your next movement phase, each of those objective markers is your vowed objective markers. If a rule refers to a unit or model being in range of a vowed objective marker, they all do. It takes effect. Then each time a Deathwing infantry unit from your army makes an attack at the target, so you get +1 to wound. This is wildly increasing because ostensibly you're just going to be taking aggressive push every single time. So every objective you do not control, you have +1 to wound against, and you have Oath of Moment in addition. And then I'll let you guys know that Deathwing Knights have had anti-monster, anti-vehicle 4+ added to the Maces of Absolution in addition to another AP. And the power weapon portion has gone to damage 2 rather than being absolutely useless. And the Inner Circle companions weapons have gone from AP1 to AP2, and then their sweep profile actually has more attacks than their strike profile because that was just stupid. Brian, how big a change do you think these things are for Dark Angels?
I think it's pretty cool with the detachments. I mean, the extra OC thing has a lot of instances where that's really good, especially when we get to Tyranids later with all of their Battleshock shenanigans. Might start seeing them more commonly. I mean, the Val's got to glow up as well. Inner Circle companions, I think people are a little more disrespectful than they probably should be. I think they're actually kind of decent.
I think they're fine. Yeah.
So overall, I think this is a positive change for them.
Yep, I think this is a real positive change. I'll speak it as the Dark Angels guy. I'm definitely down for especially with the Impulsor change is actually very significant for the Deathwing companions as well. I've got a list I'm kicking around at the moment that has 6 Blade Guard and either Ezekiel or Asmodai in a Impulsor, and then a unit of 6 Inner Circle companions in an Impulsor with another set character. And I think those 2 units are actually pretty legit. And I do think the fact that both those units really love this detachment change and really love being inside transports, I think is a very good change overall. Deathwing Knights, are we going to see these become a problem again in the meta, Inez, like with these changes? I mean, I don't think in any way the Deathwing Knights need to have the Inner Circle Task Force. I think in a Gladius, they are looking very sexy, but also...
As one of the world's #1 Deathwing Knight simps,
that's why I asked you.
I was strongly hoping they would go back to 10 models. I think that's something I was hoping they would get. I think the Mace of Absolution allows you to go around the route of not needing to run them with a chaplain anymore.
Correct.
Because most of the things you were running the chaplain for was being able to wound vehicles on 4s. I guess at the time, Wraithguard would have been the other big one, but not so much a problem anymore. I think you can get away with running maybe something like the Ancient now to get the OC problem, or a captain for the free stratagem. The place I actually like the most right now is probably in Vanguard, where you do like 2 squads of them, one with the Blade Driven Deep for Infiltrate, and then one with Shadow War Veteran for the, I think that can go on Shadow War Veteran for the Vect ability, so Lord of the Sea, and then you have 2 fairly difficult to do with squads that can uppy downy with Natural Deep Strike, and gives you some options when your Devastation Centurions are already in a good position, because Azrael is pretty good in that detachment already, and you move away from maybe playing like the Calgar Ventress version that was pretty popular sort of November last year, and you get a little bit more flexibility there, and I think that could be kind of interesting and fun to do. I'm going to just double check. You can put Shadow War Veteran on non-Phobos models.
Fair.
So that is not as cool as I thought.
That is not as cool. Yeah. All right, but Dark Angels, I think, come out overall quite decent winners. All right, Death Guard. I don't think anything's changed. Yes, that has changed. The Biologist Putrefies Explosive Maladies. It's once per battle round. You can target a unit from your army with this ability with the grenade strat for 0 CP. So no more double grenading in a turn, especially with the changes that we saw previously. So that is a decent nerf to their Mortal Wound Bomb. But I still think it is kind of just fine. It was kind of a bit silly as well. Brian, what do you make of this change? Is it impactful at all, or are we just going to see a couple less Biologist Putrefiers?
I think this one might have actually already been there.
Sorry, I apologize.
Or not? Yeah, but I feel like they could just only do it once. But it might have been that they could do it a second time, and that's
it was a CP. Yeah, it would have been a CP change.
I don't think you're going to see less, because if I remember correctly, they're also the guy that gives you these crit fives, which is incredibly powerful. So you're still just going to see them. They're just going to have their ability is just a value thing instead of it being, but like a reason to take them.
All right, moving on. Deathwatch, no changes. Which that is correct? Yeah, no changes. I don't see any
I don't think there's any changes there.
But Baum, let's wait and see if they even exist. I know nothing about their intentions for Death Watch, but with the amount of neglect that they've been gotten, very obvious neglect, that who knows? It could be really rough out there soon. Drukhari, any changes here?
No. I don't believe so, no.
No. GSC, no changes. They just got a codex. Grey Knight's Vortex of Doom ability has changed in your shooting phase. You can select one enemy unit within 18 of and visible, excluding units with the lone operative ability that are not part of an attached unit and not within 12 of this Psyker. So a big change there. You can't, and that is a change that you'll see in a couple of other places as well. There's no more sniping lone ops with Doombolt also, I believe is the other one. And then everything else is exactly as it was previously. Not a big deal. Not something we need to talk about. Pretty self-explanatory and no longer an abusable portion as well. Imperial Knights, I don't think there's any change here apart from what we've already told you about the super heavy walker ability. I don't think there's anything here in the bondsman abilities that changed.
No,
Do not
nothing.
believe so. But we already talked about how this is a much bigger deal for Imperial Knights than Chaos Knights, because I do think Canis goes off the charts with this, and I love what this can do also for the Crusader, because then you step out, you blow something up, they try and respond, they don't quite kill you, Mythic Hero, off to another section, blow some stuff up. I think it can be really quite cool. Plus, in addition, they had some points drops that are quite relevant when we get to them. Leagues of Votan, no changes. Necrons. You can no longer target the Katan with the 3-inch deep strike ability. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yep.
How big a deal is that? I mean, I don't actually think that's that big a deal. It wasn't a thing that especially bothered me all that much. And
it removes an option that you sometimes saw. Like if you were already playing the Transcendent because it could teleport about and give you some agency to do on turn one, sometimes you 3-inch deep strike that guy because it just gave you a thing to do with him. You could 3-inch deep strike him to just get on a point and flip some primary or do his shooting attack because he could actually do it. And it was a bit of durability to get onto an objective. And losing it it's a net negative, right? Like you will notice it if you are playing a Catan. If you are not, then it doesn't really matter. The notable thing with this is it restricts the Void Dragon and the Nightbringer will no longer be able to use the hyperphasing ability on turn one at all because they only have naturally strategic reserve ability, which means on turn one they can't set up using the rules. So you couldn't do this to like going second, pick up the Nightbringer, drop the Nightbringer somewhere, and then have him positioned for turn two. You would have to roll for a natural 9-inch deep strike kind of thing. So there's a little bit less flexibility in like getting the Void Dragon or the Nightbringer around the board. Particularly the Void Dragon because he has like the mortal wound output and the shooting attack was quite good at like trying to play primary that way, and it was a way to get in position turn one. You are now restricted to turn two is the earliest you're ever going to be able to set up a Catan with this rule, which I think is a good thing in the sort of like gameplay sense, but it definitely doesn't feel necessary. Like I don't think Hypergrip needed a nerf in this sense. It's not really where I think that detachment is problematic.
Yeah, I didn't think it was breaking that detachment, but it's probably fine. All right, Orcs is up next. Brian's time to shine. Green Tide detachment has changed to only have a 6-up invulnerable save against those attacks instead of the 5-up. And each time an attack targets a boys unit from your army that has 10 or more models, you get the 5-up. So you get the 5-up when you have the big squads, 6-up all the other times. Tide on muscle stratagem has changed. Instead of it being +1 for the battle round, so on turn 5 you have +5 to your charges, it now is +1 to the charge roll, and if your unit contains 10 or more models, you can re-roll that charge roll. The go get him stratagem has changed. After the attacking model has shot, your unit can make a go get him move. To do so, roll 1d6, blah, 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 blah. You can re-roll the d6 to determine how far you can move rather than, I think, it being auto 6 if you're over 10 or more models. And then lastly, Mega Knobs have a 5-up feel no pain, not a 4-up feel no pain on the war turn. Brian, how huge a hit is this to Orcs, and how do you feel about it?
I mean, look how they massacred my boys.
Boys, the keyword, right? The keyword boys. Yeah.
Yeah. This is painful, man. It's a significant nerf to Green Tide, especially the Tide of Muscle stratagem, which was really powerful in the late game. The fact that it's not an auto 6 for the Blood Surge move is also a big change. Makes the army far less deterministic to play when you're trying to play into shooting armies. And then obviously Feel No Pain going to 5-up for the Mega Knobs. I don't think anybody who played against Mega Knob unit once thought that was long for this world.
Yeah.
So I mean, overall, these are frankly good changes. It's just painful because the Green Tide was such a cool army. and it got hit so hard here.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's very quickly worth calling out for Green Tide is it lost access to the Raucous Warcaller, that your unit counts as 10 or more models all the time, ability on things like Mega Knobs, where you could have the rule ones to save from the previous detachment rule. That unit just doesn't exist anymore in the same capacity, which obviously pushes you towards something like Gazgal instead. But they just removed an option that was frankly very frustrating to play against for an army that was low AP, but was at least very interesting unit that was part of the army's very a coming at you from the front approach, where now you don't really have that kind of dynamic to it.
Yeah, fair. Good point out as well. But yeah, overall, the Orcs took a pretty rough hit, and we'll see where that shakes out as well after the points. Space Marines up next. Iron Storm has taken a slew of changes, and praise be, it was about freaking time. This could have happened 6 months ago, and no one would have blinked, but for some reason they decided, no, we like double Storm Raven. Iron Storm Spearhead Detachment, both of the beautiful aura enhancements have changed from being auras. And they've gone down in points to justify such a change as well when we get to it. But now lethal hits is select a unit, and the Master Machine War, the advance and shoot or fall back and shoot, is select a unit rather than being auras. In addition, Mercy's weakness is now 2 CP rather than 1 CP for those beautiful crit 5s. Apart from that, the only other two things are the same changes to impulses and repulses as I denoted previously with the Black Templars. Inez, I've seen you be a little bit of a Mercy's weakness stan. I have also succumbed to such a thing. But how do you feel about these changes, mate?
This is, I would almost go as hyperbolic as to say this is removal of the reasons to play Iron Storm.
I totally agree, and about damn time. This is so boring.
Agreed, but also, just agreed. I don't really have a but there, other than Marine tanks don't have a home anymore because there's nothing that really do with them, which I think is annoying. And it would be cool if there was a detachment that gave you a more nuanced approach to this. But Iron Storm is what we had, right? I think the Target Augury Rev enhancement change was amazing, fantastic. Lethal hits on one thing, great. The Master Machine War change, I actually think is, if you're playing one big thing, if you wanted to play single Storm Raven or an Astraeus, is actually kind of nice because you can now buff and you can fire and forget it. You can chuck it on the thing, send it off. You don't have to keep your character near it. So if you want to buff up a Vindicator, send it forward, that Vindicator doesn't need to stay near your tech marine anymore to do that. So it's a little bit more flexibility in that sense. And I think there's still direction there if you want to play Iron Storm. Mercy's weakness going up to 2, just a good change. Frankly, that stratagem was absurd at the points cost.
It is.
I think. Yeah, now they're not really doing dynamically costed stratagems anymore. I think you probably could have gotten away with making it 2 on vehicles, 1 on other things, but frankly, I don't care. The fact that you sometimes use it on a scout squad in combat to finish off some war spiders was not particularly a key seller of the Iron Storm detachment. Overall, just you can probably still play double Storm Raven. It's not like the fallback and shoot was all that big a deal. The lists will still do exactly the same things. It will just do less of it, and it will be more manageable, and that's fine. If you still want to play Iron Storm because Iron Storm is your favorite way to play the game, that's fine. It just will not be a tournament staple. Yeah, I mean,
you're fine.
I got 4 Storm Ravens in the garage. I would they're not gonna ever see the table again, but I think you can still play Iron Storm, and you will still. Yeah. If you are still very good at leveraging Storm Ravens and the advanced shoot and getting people's faces, the core detachment rule of reroll hit, wound, or damage every time you activate is good. And there are other good stratagems there, Alt Explode, things like that. But losing the Eliminators, losing the Storm Raven kills kind of both directions of this. And also there were point changes for Iron Storm as well. But I think overall nets to Iron Storm becoming probably the 4th or 5th most compelling way to play Space Marines rather than the 1st or 2nd.
Yeah,
and that's
I still think there is still I think a very good Iron Storm list out there, and it is pretty much just Predators and Gladiator hulls, the list, and that list is still going to blow people up, but you won't see the ultra egregious extents of what Iron Storm could do. And,
it's just Soulforge Warpack now.
Correct. Exactly right. It's pretty much on par with that now, rather than being absolutely obtuse. Space Wolves is up next. Champions of Rust Detachment got a pretty decent overhaul. It's Deedsworthy Saga Detachment rule. At the start of the first battle round, select one of the sagas listed below, excluding the Saga of Majesty. That saga is considered to be completed by your army. And all Adeptus Status model from your army gain associated benefit until the end of the battle. At the end of each player's turn, you select one of the sagas listed below, excluding the saga you picked at the first battle round. If that saga was completed by your army during that turn, all Adeptus Status models get the benefit. And then all the sagas have been changed to key off that turn. Was it Battle Round previously, or was it the start
this
of
was a change in the previous days.
Yeah,
so
that was a change.
The new one is you can pick one to start completed.
Start of the Battle Round.
It previously used to be you would pick one at the end of the Battle Round, and if you completed it, you would get it. Now it's each turn, so it triggers. You can trigger them more often, or you could theoretically trigger 2 of them at once.
Brian, take us through this. Is this going to be a big one, and what are you going to pick?
I'm going to be honest with you, Adam. I am not a Space Wolves guy.
Ryan's reading this data sheet for the first time.
He is. He had no idea.
I usually see Space Wolves and sweep my eyes right along to the next one. I think that they're all kind of situationally quite good. I mean, the first two being a little more powerful, I think. But I think the army that you're still probably playing. Actually, I don't even know what army you're still playing. Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I'm the wrong person to ask, Adam.
Apologies that I asked you, mate. Ostensibly, you can pick to have Sustained Hits 1 army-wide. You can pick to have Feel No Pain 6+ army-wide.
Adam, I've read this detachment before. I can comment.
Oh, do it. Go. Send it.
Okay. So Champions of Ross is a detachment that is kind of a little bit awkward in that all of its stratagems are terrible, and they get better if you've completed the sagas. So, for example, they have the standard Lance stratagem for Space Marines, but it gets +1 AP if you've completed Saga of the Beast Slayer. They have like a bonus charge stratagem that gets advance and charge if you have completed Saga of the Warrior Born, so on and so forth. They have the Feel No Pain against Mortal Wounds, but it requires you to complete Saga of the Bear to change it from a 5 up to a 4 up. The main thing with this is that now that you can start with Saga of the Warrior Board completed, that's the one you're most likely going to pick. That's Sustained Hits 1 at the start of the game. You can start the game with access to 1 CP advance and charge.
Correct.
And if you are going to want to play Champions of Rust, that's probably why you're doing it. Now, is that better than Gladius, who can just do that? No. The enhancements are worse and your stratagems are worse as well. And it's only one unit that can advance and charge. You don't get your turn of it. But there is some reason we have seen a tournament, a player, I want to say top 4, but it might have been win a tournament with Champions of Rust. And there are compelling things in here. You can do some cool things with, like, Saga the Bear is take damage with, or have a character of yours go below half starting wounds. You can do that pretty compellingly by just, like, running plasma pistols on all your characters.
Correct.
And hazardous them, or running Bjorn forward at your opponent, who does have a Vectora, so the Lord of the C +1 AP thing. So there's some reasonably interesting options in there. And once you get up to the point where, like, you're never going to get Saga matched online. It's hold your opponent's home objective with a character. I'm sorry if you've done that. No. You won already. You do not need to SOC. But you're pretty compelling. Like, by end of turn 2, there's a very reasonable chance you've killed a monster vehicle with a character. You've taken half damage on a character and lived, and that you started with sustained hits completed. And then suddenly everything in your army is sustained hits, leaflets, and sustained, and 6 of Feel No Pain. And if you can get that buff stacking online, it's very, very win more, but actually kind of compelling.
It's very in line. It's very in line with what they did.
Once you get there.
Yeah, it's very in line with what they did with Dark Angels, where I think they brought up your alternative detachment to be a compelling choice. But in my opinion, Gladius is still better than both. But moving on, because we've got to get this train going, we've still got an MFM. Thousand Suns. So there is quite a few changes to Thousand Suns. The Cabal Sorcerer's Army rule excludes now models that have already been selected for this rule this turn. So no more jumping out Doombolt and jumping back. So you can't double up on the same. You can only use one. I'm reading that correct, right? You can only use one Cabal points ability on one unit this turn.
Yeah, so I mean, you can. The interaction you just outlined there is still something you can do, but what it stops is, for example, the Forbidden Lore enhancement allows you to do another Cabal ritual. That guy can't, like, double move something, triple move something, Doombolt something, Doombolt again. It is limiting.
Fair. Brian, do you want to break these down for us? You're the T-Suns lad.
Yeah. So I mean, some of these changes are rather subtle but significant, I think. For example, that first one being that you can't be selected to do a Cabal ritual if you've already done one, impacting things like you couldn't, for example, have a Demon Prince who goes up and down, land, and then Doombolt something, and then double move himself away.
Yep.
So it kind of creates a dynamic where your army has to stay in this, in similar way to kind of Tyranids have to kind of operate within a synapse range. You're kind of operating Thousand Suns within a Cabal range. It's not nearly as limiting, obviously, because it's 18 inches oftentimes, or 36 near a vortex piece. But still, you kind of have this net of psychers that have to kind of work together now, as opposed to having some guys who could operate more independently. Twist of Fate, everyone's favorite Cabal ritual that just made your armor fall off your models. now happens. When it happens, you get an additional 2 AP on the weapons. And so a lot of the armies where this was particularly good against were Space Marine armies, where you would say, hey, you go from having a 3-up save and cover with armor contempt, where you're effectively on a 1-up save, to saying you now have no armor save, right? So -6 to your AP. Now it's an additional -2 to your AP. And so you're getting saves at least against this now. Still probably going to be 5s and 6s, but you're getting saves. Like Land Raiders are really interesting now. They're less easy for us, for the Thousand Sons to just pick up. Obviously, you still have access to Doomball and such, but it's still that's a nerf.
I have lost my Land Raider Redeemer to the most obtuse nonsense from Thousand Sons on multiple occasions, and so I'm really happy with this change. I still think this is a usable Cabal, but you're not going to build around this anymore. This is going to be against the right opponent. It's going to be nice to have rather than lol, slam it down. Let's use it all the time.
Yeah, I think so too. Oftentimes, I found that one of the only times I'd really want to use this one, even when it turned off saves, was when you would put units with 2 armor saves and 4 bin vol saves. You wanted to put them all on the 4 bin vol saves as the AP1, right? So, and that's still happening with this change. So, in that sense, it's probably still being used in the same way. It's just on the extreme ends when it was particularly good, it's less good than it was. Doomball is effectively the same, having the same change as the Librarian for Grey Knights, where you now can't get around Lone Up. And then Temporal Surge, again, just kind of covering the most egregious abuse cases of it. You can no longer double move a unit, so you move it in the movement phase, you move it again with Temporal Surge, and then you move it a 3rd time. That's no longer allowed. The same unit cannot be selected for the Temporal Surge ability more than once per phase.
Praise be. It was so dumb.
That's definitely good, especially in a world where there's a secret mission that says get your Warlord on the opponent's objective, and you can't move Magnus 48 inches or whatever it was. I think it's 48, to get onto your opponent's own objective with a C6 and one of the best shooting platforms in the game, to then score 20 primary points. Now it's a mere 32 inches.
I mean, woe is me. Everyone break out the violins, right? It's
and then one change which is rather significant, I think, and this is probably the biggest nerf that T-Sons took, is the Exalted Sorcerer on disc. And in the movement phase, you roll the dice on a 2-up, a model that you could see within 18 inches, or you could see within 18 inches. Monsters, vehicles, infantry, just everything. Was half move, half charge, half advance, which effectively took things like jump pack infantry and turned them from a 24-inch threat range into a 12-inch threat range at the most extreme possible example. That was a bananas ability, especially in matchups where you're fighting really aggressive armies like World Eaters or Blood Angels or something like that. And
it was the best in the game, and it was the next one wasn't even on the horizon. Like, it was just so incredibly powerful.
100%. And now it's more in line with other abilities you see in the game. It happens in your shooting phase, which is another important change for how it kind of interacted with the rest of the army. You have to hit them with one of your attacks. It's a flamer, so that's going to happen. But now it only works on things that are not monsters or vehicles, and rather than having everything, it just subtracts 2 from your move and 2 from your charge. Importantly, not interacting with the advance roll at all. So that one's pretty big. The fact that the timing changes as well, in addition to the slowdown changing, because you can no longer jump your wizard forward, slow down. You have to actually commit your wizard to sit there and slow them down, and then deal with the consequences, which Thousand Sons players, we don't like dealing with consequences.
In totality, I don't feel like the needle moved horrendously on T-Sons. In fact, with the nerfs coming down to a bunch of other armies, I think T-Sons come out better than most, but it's not. It's by no means a death knell to their best builds, but things are going to be a little bit more awkward, a little bit less juicy is the way I see it. Like, you can't just have it all as a T-Sons player. Inez, what are your thoughts about these changes?
Yeah, I think the main one that obviously stands out is the Exalted Sorcerer on disc. Like, we were seeing a decent amount of lists that were playing 2 or 3 of those, and it really did make some of those melee matchups quite difficult. Traditionally, one of the things that you can deal with Thousand Sons is they're not the best at dealing with getting rushed. And the Exalted Sorcerer on disc kind of made it so that didn't matter. You would stick +2 move on them with Magnus. They would go 14 plus D6 forward. They would slow things. You would double move 2 of them backwards. Or you would, Death Doombolt, like the priority thing. You would potentially chuck out some indirect. And then you would deal with all the things that were pressuring you. And then you would have another turn of like dealing with them, slowing them, getting your Zangor and your cultists in their face, and just like restricting that. Whereas now it's kind of you're going to drop 4 off their threat range, but if units are fast enough, they might still get to you, right? You're not reducing advance rolls anymore. Whereas before you could sit 12 inches in front of them and be like, well, you move 3 and you charge 6. So I'm out of charge. I'm out of shooting range, or I'm out of declarable range for a standard like 6-inch move model. Now you can't do that. So there's a bit more of an axis of attack in 2000 Suns now. I think, as you say, they're not going to disappear with the Earth. I think they're still one of the best armies in the game, but they have, some definable weaknesses now where before you might have said that only like really Eldar was like a genuinely bad matchup for them. You might introduce a few more things now.
Beautiful. All right, moving on to our last 2 factions. Tyranids have had a slew of changes, the first of which is pretty significant with the synapse rule. Whilst a Tyranid unit from your army is within synapse range, you take battle shock on a 3d6 instead of a 2d6, and each time model that unit makes a melee attack, add 1 to the strength characteristic. So army-wide +1 strength if you're playing correctly at all times is going to matter. I don't believe, has Shadow in the Warp changed? Each time an enemy unit takes a battle shock test, if it's within 6 of 1 or more, yes, you get a -1 from synapse units to battle shock tests.
No, only the Shadow in the Warp battle shock test, not
only the Shadow in the Warp.
Yeah.
Yep. Good to note. Crusher Stampede has had an addition added to their +1 to hit if you're below starting, +1 below half strength, because that rule was trash. In addition, whilst the Tyranid monster unit from your army, excluding battle shock unit, is at starting strength, add 2 to the OC control. Not sure that's going to shake things up too horrendously, but not bad, just some extra. And then untrammeled ferocity stratagem until the end of the phase, each time a model in your unit makes a normal advance or fallback move, it can move through enemy models, excluding Titanic models and terrain and selections of terrain features that are 4 up in height. And when doing so, the same restrictions and battle shock test on a D6 that you would find in the Super Heavy Walker's ability as well. So that is pretty freaking cool. That is something good and unique at least. The datasheet ability of the Hive Tyrant has changed to add an aura of lethal hits, which is pretty freaking cute, and I think actually makes the Hive Tyrant very attractive, especially taken possibly as a double. The Neurolictor has had the Synapse keyword added. A Neuro Tyrant can now join Zoanthropes, in addition to Neurogaunts and Tyrant Guard, which actually funnily unlocks Big Guns Never Tire, so you can shoot Zoanthropes into combat, which is hilarious. Broodlord and the Parasite of Mortrex now have the Shadow in the Warp ability and keywords of Synapse. And then Morlocks, Raveners, and Trigons get Vanguard Invader, so they key off the Vanguard detachment there. And then Execrenes have +1 strength now, strength 9. They were already probably the best unit in the army, and now they are a little bit better. And then the Rupture Cannon for the Tyrannofex is damage D6 +6, putting it in line with things like the Railgun, which is a pretty decent improvement there.
Rest in 2d6 damage.
So yeah, it was the on par with the DDA for lol, nothing or dead results will occur from this gun. I'll start with you first, Brian, because I feel like that's fair is fair. This, even though is about to pop off. Tell us your thoughts on Tyranids coming out of this and how holistic an improvement you believe this may be.
I think this is great. I think a lot of the changes here are just kind of poking things up. And Tyranids overall, I think we're probably in a better spot than a lot of players, including Tyranids players, want to admit.
Yeah.
They were probably in like an okay spot. They could definitely use some help, and I think this is exactly in line with what they should have gotten. A little bit better, couple new ways of playing. Some of the other changes, like if the Crusher Stampede change, it's not going to change like massively the game, but it's really cool that now your monsters have an army rule that actually affects you when you're not hurt.
Yeah. So
now your opponent goes, hey, do I hurt you and make you stronger, or do you not hurt you and now you've got more OC and it's hard for me to deal with? And that 2 OC against a lot of monsters can put them into an interesting space for OC as well. The extra strength while in Synapse and melee, really powerful. Things like Gene Stealers going up to strength 5 tips them into an interesting space. Shadows in a Warp also having additional -1. I mean, the Tyranid Shadow and the Tyranid Battle Shock game is real. I know a lot of times we tend to look at Battle Shock as, an ability that maybe one time will make it so I don't control an objective when I want it. But against Tyranids, Battle Shock is very real, and you have to be aware of it at all times. And they have the ability to add some rather insane stacks onto how much it affects you.
All right.
So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Inez, fire from the hip. Let's go.
All right, let's just go from the top. So obviously the Synapse Army rule with adding +1 strength introduces a lot for the smallest things and the biggest things for the book. It doesn't do a ton for the things that are like in the middle, that's sort of like strength 5, 6, 7 threshold, because they don't get up to the strength of the hard vehicles more consistently and doesn't increase them against small things all that much. You kind of like exactly the things that they're the same strength as their toughness, you get +1 to wound, and it's nice to have. But everything that's kind of like strength 3 and 4, so I think the main ones for me are Hormagaunts and Gene Stealers. Going from 3 to 4 and 4 to 5 are huge thresholds in the game that we play of Warhammer, where there's a lot of toughness 3, 4, and 5 things running about, and also a decent amount of toughness 9 in the case of Gene Stealers going to strength 5. Introducing the ability for them to punch up in those situations just massively increases the output of a unit like Gene Stealers and Hormagaunts as well. Hormagaunts have 3 attacks at strength 3 with AP 1. That suddenly starts to become a compelling thing that can kill a small Eldar unit with +1 strength. When you have there's an ability for the Neurotyrant that can hand out 2 units being within Synapse at 18 inches, means they can run off and go and do their job independently without necessarily needing to be like in that bubble. So you have a bit more reach with that ability as well. Very compelling for those kinds of data sheets. The Broodlord having Synapse as well, as we'll get to, makes Gene Stealers operate independently with that as well. And then at the top end, you have things like the Screamer Killer is strength 10, pushing that to strength 11 is a very big threshold. The Maleceptor is strength 9 and 7 on its big attack and its sweep attack. Pushing those to 10 and 8 are very good breakpoints for wounding toughness 4 things and toughness 10 things and also 9 things. It's just +1 to wound in a lot of those cases. And there are a lot of those data sheets that sit around that like 7 to 9 threshold that benefit a lot, and a lot of things at that 3 to 4 threshold. Doesn't do a ton for the middle bugs, but like I said, some of the more compelling data sheets anyway, like Tyranid Warriors and Vanguard, are already pretty good. They didn't really need a ton of help, so them not getting it isn't a big a deal. Shadow of the Ork Army rule, the additional -1 on Battle Shock is kind of, if you set up for your Battle Shock turn more appropriately, it is more likely to work. I think that is just a good thing. I think it's fairly safe to assume that if you are in range of a Synapse unit and there is like a Neurotyrant on the board, you should just assume you're failing your Battle Shock test and be happy if you pass it. And yeah, that's annoying from the person to be on this other side of, and definitely very powerful, but you can deal with that. You can kill the Synapse creatures before they get to you. You can screen them, move block them, make sure there's multiple things on objectives that are separated apart, set up overwatches. Like, it's still a limited part of your opponent's army that is interactable. And I don't think that one will come up as much as some of the other ones. It's a nice to have, not a need to have. The Crusher Stampede stuff, broadly, I don't think the move through stuff, like, it's nice to have, but nothing is really fast or hitty enough in areas to really be worth pushing it that way, or doesn't benefit enough from being in Crusher Stampede to really benefit. The +2 OC one is actually kind of interesting on a few units. Because the Neurotyrant is a monster that can join units, you can actually hand out +2 OC to some stupid things, like a 22 Neurogant squad that would have OC 70. 71 with that guy attached until it loses 1 model, at which point it drops to like 20. But don't worry about that. It's 70 OC. It's really funny.
Someone already whipped out to me that Crusher Stampede now makes a better Unending Swarm, and I'm like, I can't disagree, but also please never say that again.
I mean, it isn't actually that good, because that unit then gets +1 to hit, but it already has +1 to hit from the Neurotyrant. But like, there are some interesting places like Zoanthropes where you could do that. Where a Zoanthrope squad with +3 with 3 OC on every Zoanthrope, or you shoot it, and at which point you introduce it being +1 to hit and then +1 to wound when it's below half. If there's like a Neurotyrant and 2 guys, it's a unit that hits on 2s with deep shots. +1 to hit, like, pretty reasonable. I don't think it's a compelling reason to play Crusher, but it's there. You also have like stuff like the Psychophage that become OC5, which maybe flip some objectives quite aggressively and aren't really worth your opponent targeting, and would appreciate the +1 to hit. The Hive Tyrant lethal hits change is amazing for things like Invasion Fleet. Invasion Fleet naturally has sustained hits or lethal hits against certain targets, infantry or vehicles and monsters. Being able to introduce lethal hits all the time, even when you're picking sustained hits against infantry, really ramps the damage of that detachment. You have things like Old One Eye and Carnifexes with full reroll sustained hits, lethal hits, and 24 plus 8 plus 2d3 plus blast shots with full rerolls, and you're just drowning saves. Millions of AP2 if you stack that with a Paravore, another bunch of AP1. Just very compelling. It also helps with the generally, like, Tyranids do have a general strength problem, and obviously the melee buff helps that. But with things like the Maleceptor being strength 10, the Extreme being strength 9, they don't have the best answer in the world for vehicles at range, and giving them lethal hits, it doesn't add a lot. But we've seen in the case of Tau, with just things like Riptides and Hammerheads, being able to have that lethal hits just pushes you over the edge of 2 X-Queens probably do kill a Predator now, where maybe they wouldn't before. And that's just that kind of taking the edge off of your opponent's ability to deal with you that maybe gets you into position to use some of your melee abilities. The Neurolictor and Broodlord and Parasite gaining Synapse, and then notably the Neurolictor didn't gain Shadow in the Warp, but does have Synapse.
Yeah.
So you need a non, because they're not characters. So you do have a bit more capacity for doing things like the Synaptic Nexus Aura is the Battle Shock Grenade Stratagem. You have more sources for that +1 to strength aura, and they are less likely to fill battle shocks. The Neurolictor standing on an objective that's on 1 wound is actually perfectly capable of flipping a primary now, because it just goes, you take a battle shock, you maybe fail one, I probably don't fail mine, and I might have 1 OC on this objective and you've just failed it.
Yeah, it's cute.
Neurolictor much better at that independent job it was doing. The Broodlord and the Parasite ones, again, they're nice to have. The Parasite still doesn't do a ton. It's still an 80-point blown up with stealth that gets some rippers when it kills an infantry, but it's a cheap blown up. Like that, the pack, I feel like for all the talk of battle line, the Pariah Nexus pack actually strongly encourages you to have 3 lone operatives sitting in your deployment zone, so you can do containment, mark for death, and sabotage, and recover assets. And it's like, battle line, what? I'm getting points in my deployment zone. Having lone operatives to do that is great, and a fast.
They're the new. They replace your swarms, your 0 OC swarms that people taking scarabs and other nonsense little swarms with 0 OC couldn't really do that now. Cheap lone opping is a great idea.
In between, so like Tyranids now have 4 lone operatives that are reasonably compelling between the Parasite, the Lictor, the Neurolictor, and Death Leaper. Death Leaper is obviously huge, which makes him quite hard to hide. The Lictor doesn't have an avoidable save. The Neurolictor is quite expensive, and the Parasite is fast. So you have kind of, what do you want? There is something that will do it, which I think is cool. Molochs, Ravagers, and Trigons gaining Vanguard Invader is hilariously incredible. That detachment has a return to reserve stratagem, and it also has a turn 1 deep strike stratagem for Vanguard units. So you can now do things like 1 CP, turn 1, bring in 2 Molochs, do some mortal wounds, end of your opponent's turn, pull them off the board. You could do that for 0 CP with a Hive Tyrant within 12, because the Hive Tyrant doesn't care, can reduce stratagem cost by 1, and it's per turn for the Hive Tyrant, not per battle round. So you can do some really, really cool things in Vanguard with like flipping units on and off the board. You've also got now the Neurotyrant that can join Zoanthropes, another very compelling unit for Vanguard or Synaptic Nexus or Invasion Fleet, handing out lethal hits, sustained hits, +1 to hit to that unit. Big guns never tire, as you say. And Vanguard Invader or Onslaught can teleport it about. Very, very, very interesting unit. Gives you a really good leader unit for the Neurotyrant. I tried Tyrant Guard. I don't understand why they have a 3-up save at him. And then the Execrene buff is just flat. It does more, and it was already one of the best data sheets in the book. I'll not go as far as the best because the Maliceptor exists. But the Tyrannifex change, I don't think changes the needle on that. I think
does not change.
Rather play the Acid Spray, which just gives you that flavor. But the Rupture Cannon is, if you had it modeled and you want to put it on the table now, fair play. It'll be funny.
Yep. Beautifully done and holistic, Inez. Appreciate that. And now, World Eaters, no change. And we're done. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for getting through what is the most extensive slate that we've had in a very long time. Possibly the most extensive that we've ever had, but we'll remain that to be seen. Brian, give us your rating out of 10 for how happy you are as a player with this slate.
I think this is probably... I think this is a 9 out of 10. I think every change they made is a step in the right direction, and for the most part, it's the step of the right size. And there are just a couple spots where maybe they could have gone a little bit further, but nothing feels like it was overly done. Nothing feels like it was really. Only a couple things feel like it was underdone. Probably the biggest miss is probably Guard. I think Guard probably could have been buffed a little more, considering the overall changes around them. But that's a problem that can be solved with points as we move along.
I agree. I think I was about to say 10 out of 10 if they did something for Deathwatch, right? Inez, what's your number?
Yeah, I would give this somewhere between an 8 and a 9 as well. There are definitely a few things that are missing, a few things that I think could have gone further, and I think a few things that didn't go far enough. I think the main ones in each of those categories, I think Thousand Sons probably didn't go far enough. I think they could have done a little bit more. I think Sons of Sanguinius probably needed something. I think that army not catching any changes is a very interesting choice.
Well, I think it should have been points, and when we get to it, it's the fact that they Sorry, continue.
I think it could have been points. I also think it could have been something like the Death Company rerolls are melee only, and that would have been at least a start.
Yeah.
But I think there needed to be something there. Broadly, that army is very powerful. And I think generic Space Marines are the one thing that I think really could have done with a little bit more. Obviously, we saw some changes for Champions of Ross and the Dark Angels detachments, and we saw a general nerf to Ironstorm. But there's nothing really here for core Codex. I am playing the Space Marine book, Salamanders or Ultramarines or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's, across this and points, there was nothing. And all this has kind of done is shrunk the space of Space Marines again, to the point where I feel like if you're not playing Blood Angels, you are like almost probably doing something wrong outside of maybe a couple of specific builds like Righteous Crusaders, Black Templars.
Yeah.
And I think that that's probably a miss because it is such a large percentage of the population. And I think that it would have been, we were floating around some ideas like giving them, a +1 CP a turn if you didn't play a sub-faction. And, I feel like that might be a bit far, but like it feels like there needs to be something to give you a reason to not just play one of the other chapters.
Yeah.
And there isn't right now.
I
think that's a mistake.
I wanted something for the Intercessor. I wanted a freaking Intercessor something. It's been so, like, apart from Broviathan, Intercessors have felt horrifically trash since they came out. Literally, Broviathan was the only time the Intercessor felt like a non-dumb waste of points.
Intercession, you get to pick a second detachment rule.
I was about to say something for the Intercessors, or give them rerolls to wound against the Oath target, or give them another freaking AP on their gun. I don't care.
Stormguard only get reroll ones, Adam. Like, come on, what are we doing? We're muscling in on their identity.
Yeah, but they needed something. Something for the Intercessor would have been huge, because that would have been just across the board an increase. But anyway, we are burning the candle pretty freaking hard. We're recording this at like 1 a.m. my time now. So let's move over to the MFM. We're going to take this one faction each, starting with myself, then going to Brian, then going to Inez, and we're just going to work our way through this bad boy. And if anybody has some extra comments they wish to say, feel free to just dive right in. Adeptus Mechanicus, this is going to be the hardest one to talk about, and probably the one that I'll open up and all three of us can have their say, because this is a huge brick of red. And we all know if the sisters' points were with this new codex were as printed at the time, the balanced data slate at the time, the previous MFM, Adeptus Mechanicus would have been the strongest faction we have seen in the game up until this point of 10th edition. It would not have been even close. Only possibly double Wraith Knight at the start of the edition could possibly have even, held the candle or been in contention for the conversation. They would have been as busted, I believe, as light Harlequins were on release 9th edition. They would have been nuts, just outvaluing, out-trading, out everything all the time. These are pretty wildly expensive units now. The unit of Morphin Vial with the Pennant engines is pretty gross. Mortifiers, Paragons, Repentia squads being 180. These are very expensive units now. The amount of models in your army is now much more reminiscent of how many units you get for something like Space Marines, maybe 10-20% more than Space Marines, but they are not the endless value army that they previously were. It looks a lot more respectable. I still think they're going to be one of the best armies in the game. But it will remain to be seen whether they are the best. They're definitely, I think, an A-tier army as it sits right now. Brian, what's your take on sisters and these points?
Yeah, I think these are actually spot on for where the points should be. I think that they are every data, almost every data sheet in that codex got not just better, but significantly better. The detachments are all incredible. I mean, as you said, it's when it came out and we had the original points, it was one of the most powerful things we've ever seen. This is a huge increase. This changes them from an army of rats with multi-guns that score points and are impossible to kill them all, to a semi-elite army that's still kind of papery finish, and in the Imperium space that's kind of interesting. This elite but fragile army.
Feels a lot more like Eldar now, doesn't it? Rather than
it's like Eldar, but different and doing different things different ways. They're not quite as fast, but they have a bit more stuff. But they have a lot more access to more reliable dice. More combined arms, that kind of stuff. So I think it's really cool. I think this is good.
Inez.
Yeah, I kind of land the same. I think there's a couple of things in here that maybe feel like they were a little punitive. I think specifically Repentia feels like it was
a 180. Yeah,
it's a bit brutal for what is effectively like an Eldar model. It's quite a lot for a melee only piece. But I also think that detachment, the Pennant detachment, has just inherent issues with if it's too good in singles play, then it becomes very polarizing in terms of what can play and not. So overall, broadly think that having built a few sisters lists and seen what they look like on the table, it's an army that plays the game the same as everyone else. It feels very powerful, but nothing in there is like you have to make compromises in list building. You are going to have to make decisions about whether you want to have lots of units to generate miracle dice, if you want to have lots of powerful characters, you want to have lots of scoring units. You can choose to do 2 or 3 of those things. You cannot do all 4 or all 5.
Yes.
And that's that's healthy design. You're going to have to make decisions. Like list building is good when you do not just shove in the 1,600 points of everything you want and then decide what 400 points to fill it with. But when you're going with Brian's favorite list building approach of you put 2,500 points in and figure out what you can do without, and that introduces weaknesses because you're not just building a list the way you want it. You now have actual fail points.
I totally agree, mate. I do think these are more on the cautious side of the points, because things like 150 for pennant engines, I think, is probably going to end up being too many in hindsight. But I'm more than happy for it to start here and come down later than any.
Well, pennant engines are 75; they're 150 for 2.
That's what I mean. Yeah, 150 for 2, 75 for a relatively bad save, low toughness for 75 points.
Advance and charge, feel no pain, twin linked flamers.
Exactly right.
Feels fine.
Exactly right. I'm more than happy for it to start high, see if it's busted and warrants a reduction.
You're just going to stop bolting keywords on the sisters models. And
correct.
At least
all right, Brian, take it away with Custodes.
So Custodes saw a bunch of points come down for their Forge World items. Their codex, I think, is all the same. The ones that are probably the most interesting, I think, in fact, really just the one that I think is most interesting are Venatari Custodians. The fact that they're now 330 points for 6 of them means that you can put 3 units of 6 in Deep Strike. Mm-hmm. And then because of the wording for strat changes, there specifically calls out the Rapid Ingress stratagem. So now on turn 2, you can bring in 18 Venatari from Deep Strike on the same turn. For no CP, which is a choice. So we'll see if that ends up translating to being good, or is just kind of a boogeyman that's like pretending to be something it's not.
Yeah, this is wild because it bucks so many of the recent trends, actually all the trends of 10th edition, and the fact that they're giving so much attention to Forge World, which I do love to see. And them acknowledge that Forge World is literally like 60% of the usable units in Custodes, most editions, if not more. So it's good to see them get that. I wish there was some more reductions here for things like the Dreadnoughts as well, rather than the only Dreadnought that went down as the Telemon. But yeah, 100% agree. Moving on. Inez, do your best with Admech. Unless you got something to add for Custodes.
No, I think that broadly covered everything I wanted to say. Okay, so Admech across the board, as we saw, basically got +1 to either weapon skill or skill depending on the turn. So everything kind of got a little bit better. And also a bunch of things that didn't have some keywords before gained some keywords. What that represents is that fundamentally everything in this book went up a little bit to a decent amount. So you have things like the Iron Shard Ballistari went up from 50 to 70 points. The Skitarii Vanguard went up 10 points from 80 to 90. I think the other really interesting ones, Catherine Breachers went up 5 points from Mortal to 160 from 3. Yeah. And then the Taraxi Sterilizers, which I believe are the Flamer ones, but don't hold me to that. The Taraxi Sanitizers, who knows, went up 10 per 5. So there's just a little bit more, you're going to lose 150-ish points across sort of standard sort of Rad Zone or Hunter Cohort builds we were seeing. But in return for that, you're going to gain a lot of flexibility and a decent amount of damage output.
Units will do things. It's wild.
You're going to play an army that is probably not cresting $1 a point anymore, and you will actually do some things when you do some stuff. Between Rust Stalkers and Infiltrators getting damage output increases, there is a lot more capacity to do some good things here. I think this will still be an army that requires a Deft Hand to play, and it remains to be seen if, I would say the army kind of went up 40% in power level, but up 20% in cost. But given where it was before, is that going to be enough to push it back up to playable? Or more importantly, to overcome the burden of convincing people to change army to it when they aren't already Admech players? I think that's actually the harder one, is that there's a very real barrier to jumping to an army, especially one that is as inflexible as Admech, that there's a lot of draw to just being like, no, I'm just going to play what I'm doing because it's not so much better than what I'm doing already. That I think we'll still see this army be fairly unpopular unless somebody finds a build that just works really well. I would keep an eye on some players in Australia like Alex Engelzos, potentially Richard Seeko's or War Streams. You'll see some really cool things coming out of them. Rickard Nilsson in Sweden, for example, if you're keeping an eye on the 3 major regions of the 40k player base, I would say. So keep an eye out for some Admech players breaking the world.
All right, Titanicus has not changed. Who cares? Let's move on. You mad lads taking your Warhound Titan will still have a fun time. Eldari has seen points reductions on every Phoenix Lord that isn't Fuegan or Baharoth, which is not wildly crazy, but it does make me more excited to possibly see Karandras and Scorpions on the table. I still don't think you're going to see Jane Zar or some others, but at 90 points for Karandras, I think he's quite attractive. Void Weaver and Viper both down a couple of points as well. I think puts them possibly on the menu, but we're seeing increases to Reapers, Skyweavers, Warp Spiders, Fire Dragons, Hawks, Yvrain, and Shadow Spectres. And I think when it all shakes out, you've probably lost 1.5 5-mans out of your Infinity 5 model unit army. And I think that army is still probably just fine. I don't think you're going to miss it all too much, but I do think you can change those points over to Vipers for 75, and I don't think you're going to be too unhappy. Gents, anything to add here on Eldari?
No, I think it's just the units you see everywhere went up a little bit. You're gonna have a couple less of them. That's really it.
That's it. All right, Adeptus and the Imperium unchanged. So moving on, Brian, Astra Militarum. I should have lined this up so I do this, but feel free to take it away.
Well, I mean, the biggest thing you're going to see there are drops in the things that took the biggest hit in the global changes. So things with the regimental keyword that you'd want to return, like Armored Sentinels. Indirect pieces, generally speaking, went down. I don't think those pieces came down enough to account for those changes, which is unfortunate. The Death Strike, though, came down. That's obviously super important.
Yeah.
Well, the one here, which is actually pretty interesting, though, is the Rogel Dorn at 240. That's a really powerful data sheet, and at 240, it's something you might consider running 3 of and seeing where you're at. So that's definitely pretty cool, especially with the changes to getting lethal hits against other armored targets. So that's cool. Overall, I'd say not enough of a change in the right direction, considering the overall nerfs that they took just from existing in 10.5.
100% agree with everything you just said. So yeah, moving on. Inez, Black Templars.
Yep, so Black Templars saw the same change as Core Marines, with the Reaper and the Valiant both going up 10 points. Black Templars also saw a general change in their kind of rules that says you can only take Black Templars variants of vehicles now. This was a change that most Space Marines saw, where if you had restrictions on your pure detachment, you also saw that come across all of them. So things like Space Wolves losing the Apothecary. So that does mean is you are now required to pay the points, even for something like a Valiant that might not necessarily get a lot of benefit out of the multi-metal. You do have to play the more expensive version. I think the Lancer not going up is actually the most interesting part here.
Me too.
Going up tend to go with the other ones, where the Reaper and Valiant are probably a little less played. But now all of them are sitting the same at 170, so it's kind of dealer's choice which one you want. I think all 3 of them are pretty compelling. They're still completely fine data sheets at 170. They're definitely nudging into the point where it's like, do you want this or a Vindicator? But with the Vindicator going up a little bit as well. When we get to that, there's still plenty of compelling reasons to play all of these vehicles.
I would like to...
In comparison to the Predator Destructor is more painful when that's 40 points cheaper. But
I'd like to give a shout out to the Promos Crusader squad, which didn't get touched when virtually every other Horde-esque unit in the game got nerfed in some fashion. The Promos Crusader squad for 180 for 20 lads is looking like it could be the strongest Horde unit in the game if you wanted to push that lever and play 100 of them, or more likely 80. But yeah, just wanted to give a little shout out there. 280
for 20 of them, is it not?
Yes, 280. So what did I say?
You said 180. I was very confused.
Apologies. Yes, 280. Still, 14 points a model is absolute banger for that unit with the Feel No Pain. Blood Angels, no changes. What were they thinking? This is now the best, hands down, not even close, best Space Marine army in the game, and it's actually
so I actually think it's kind of difficult to where to place point changes for this army, because when you look at things, they're kind of expensive, right? I mean, like Vanguard veterans are cheap at 210, but then you add 100 points for just the character for a guy that has 4 wounds. That's probably appropriately priced. Death Company, 10 of them for 280. That's 300 points for a unit that's very good, but also does die. You know, it's actually kind of hard for me to look at these points and say where they should have raised them. I do agree they need something. It's just, if you were to ask me what should it be, I would have no idea.
It's Assault Initiatives with jump packs, and that's the problem, because you can't nerf them without hitting everyone else. Which is why I think they needed data sheet changes. I think you needed to remove, like, either make them reroll ones, make them reroll ones all with Death Company instead of reroll all hits, or make it reroll melee only. something to just tamp down the edge of that and make it a little bit less ridiculous. I also think that they probably should just block Clock Death Company, but that's a conversation that I don't think anybody wants to have.
That's fair. Inez, do you agree with me? Best Space Marines, not even next contenders, not even close.
Yeah, I think there's a compelling argument that they're the best army in the game.
I was about to say, I think this may be an S tier army now. They are,
and I think that's
absolutely
part of the problem is that I'm looking at that, and then I'm looking at Space Marines, and I'm like, well, these are using the same data sheets. Like a Blood Angels army is captains with assault intercessors and impulsors, and assault intercessor with jump packs and vanguard veterans, and then like a few characters. And then like two death company squads, and like, well, you can make the death company 400 points, but the other stuff you would just cut them and play.
Yeah.
But like when you do that in Gladius, it sucks.
You take a Ultramarines Vanguard veteran in a Gladius, and then you look at what that same Blood Angels Vanguard veteran in the same Sons of Sanguinius detachment can do and can kill and can threaten, and it's obscene. The difference is ridiculous. Like you could almost take two Vanguard veterans in the Gladius and then they would be as good as the Blood Angels one. And that just is not a price point you can quantify well. I agree with you. I, in my opinion, if I was just to go off the cuff, I think Blood Angels might be the best army in the game as it sits right now. If not, they're a top 3.
Yeah, and, it's certainly between them, Thousand Sons, and then like maybe something like Sisters now.
Yeah, exactly right. All right, Brian, Chaos of Demons.
So we saw decreases in some of the things that you would, are generally kind of overpriced. Battlecore getting a little cheaper. Overall, I mean, I think this is fine. I mean, Nurglings kind of went down, which makes sense because they're OC0 gain through actions. You saw things like
Nurglings didn't change at points cost. They're still 40.
For the bigger squads, they did.
Yeah.
Oh, for the bigger, the ones
for 69, yeah.
Which I think kind of is makes sense. But then you have like the Fiends and generally just things kind of just tweak down a little bit. I don't know that it's enough to make a significant impact in a given strategy, more so than what the army the army rule changes are. So we'll have to see how those kind of pan out and then go from there. You pointed out I think before that some of the battle line units are on a little weaker side for demons, but I would actually say that some of them are really good. They're just kind of expensive. Like the Horrors, for example, was an incredibly annoying and very good unit. It's just 140 points is a bit much for them.
Yeah, but I mean, like to your point, if there were like 110 point big horrors, oh man, you would play 100. It would be
nuts, right? So that's part of the problem that demons have is some of their rules are very good, but if you price them to move, you create problems.
Yeah,
and it creates a very difficult design space, I think, for demons to try and get them into a good spot.
Only one I'll point out is a Soul Grinder for 180. When you have so many better ways to deliver it and get it into firing lanes now with the deep striking off the other greater demons, could be very, very, very cute to see that come back into the game. Inez, Chaos Knights.
Yeah, so Chaos Knights, again, not a ton of changes here. The Abominant came down 15. I think it's still very depressing to play. The Despoiler came down 10. And then a bunch of the Forward Knights, the Acheron, the Atropos, the Lancer, and the Styrix came down points. I don't think any of those are the ones that I'm really excited about running in Chaos Knights. The Despoiler, I think, is definitely reasonably interesting, especially as an ally, because it brings its own rerolls. The Rampager is still 380 points, so still nice and cheap. And then, the standard Brigands, Carnivores, and Stalker package is completely fine in the state that it was. I don't think a ton changes here for Chaos Knights, unless you're really excited about running a Despoiler, which with it being able to walk through walls and run like a melee weapon and a gun with rerolls on a hit and wound each time it activates, like it's pretty reasonable. I don't think you'll be upset to have it.
10 points down on Lord of Dread, which was already my favorite of the detachments. The enhancements means you just get 10 more points in your army if you're playing it, but it's not enough of a break point to shake anything up. Chaos Space Marines up next saw a slew of points increases, not a single point reduction. Accursed Cultists up, both Predators are up, Havocs are up, Venom Crawler, Warp Talons are up, Legionaries being a key one are up by 10 points, Raptors, Vindicator are up as well, and Warp Talons got smacked in the teeth, up to 270 for 10 models now, up almost a third in points. I think it's between a quarter and a third in points.
It was just less than a quarter. Yep.
Yeah, wild. Sorry, my bad. But this is huge. These are huge changes, and unfortunately, these are probably the time where I'll say this is more increases than they should have gotten. They got an increase on every relevant unit, every single one, with the exception of maybe like Forge Fiends, I guess, and Chosen.
Abaddon is the only one going up as well.
Yeah, but Abaddon, I guess, Abaddon 295 is, I think, probably about right. But yeah, I'm going to throw this one over to you guys because I haven't seen what a new Chaos Space Marine list looks like, but this looks like pretty rough, possibly one of the most nerfed armies points-wise.
I would say a CSM list looks like if you took 2 copies of every single one of these data sheets, except maybe the Predator Annihilator and the Curse Collists. That was probably what a CSM list looked like, just about, maybe Raptors as well.
Yep.
I was running through like a few of the CSM Renegade Raiders lists and Soulforge lists and like Packbound and every detachment that I built. And all of those lists went up more than Canoptic Core did. So the standard Canoptic Core list went up about 130 points. My CSM list, like even the ones that were only playing 10 Warp Talents, went up over 100.
That's wild.
And it did not feel necessary. That book was compelling, but mostly because of Warp Talons, and everything else is very once in a blue moon, you can jump through 7 hoops and, you know, the Emperor himself will deliver you a 7-inch charge. And it feels really rough. Like, it feels like a target attack at all the things that were playable and interesting. Like, Legionnaires and Rhinos were probably the most fair and compelling thing that the army did, and it's like, please stop running those. I'm like, do you want me to just play Abaddon and Predators? Like, that can't be the way you think this is going to be more fun for everybody. So yeah, I think it's a shame the way they moved the needle here, because I would have put CSM somewhere in like the middling tier, sort of, you know, to use the standard like S through F of like E tier. And this feels like they got hit the hardest of any army in the game, other than Navy Guard.
Agreed. Just strictly on points wise, yeah, they got hit the hardest of any army, which is kind of wild. Brian, anything to add to CSM?
I'm generally, I think, fine with these changes, with the exception of Havoc. Havocs feel like they caught flack for no reason. I don't really know what that's about. But I feel like with a lot of these things, like, they're not massive increases on a lot of these weapon profiles, but I think it almost feels more like you're pricing them a little higher because of the fact that they get the sustained hits or lethal hits compared to their Imperial compatriots, which feels correct to me. They're better than their Imperial ones in that sense. Legionaries are an incredibly good data sheet. I mean, I don't think this is pricing them out of the point where you want to take them. I never want to see a Curse Cultist on the battlefield again, so I'm okay with that.
Yeah,
and the Warp Talons are just incredible, right? So overall, these don't feel that unfair. I do think maybe they should have had some decreases too. Maybe to help balance it, and that's probably what's missing here. I don't really disagree with the increases. Maybe there should be a couple more decreases.
100%, exactly what I think. I think some of these things went up fairly, maybe went up a little bit harder than they needed to, but the fact that there's nothing to offset it is the issue for me. Like, there's nowhere else to go. Anyway, moving down, we've got Dark Angels up next, Deathwing Knights, and the Dark Shroud hasn't actually gone up. They've got it listed as red, but it hasn't actually gone up. It was 215 last time. But Deathwing Knights have gone up to, you know, respect the fact that they're actually a real unit again that will do damage rather than just being deep struck onto an objective and hoping they don't cop any hands. Overall, Dark Angels came out of this big winners when coupled with the balanced data set changes. Brian, tell us about Death Guard.
So you saw the Biologist Putrefier go up a little bit. Blight Lords came down. The Foul Blight Spawn went up. Blight Haulers and the Noxus Blightbringer went down, and so the Plague Surgeon. So a couple characters went down, a couple characters went up. Generally speaking, it was the characters you frequently saw went up a little bit. The ones you didn't came down a little bit. Blight Lord Terminators coming down to 310 for 10 models is pretty interesting, I think. They're actually a data sheet which I think is decent. They're still kind of have the Death Guard problem of we're slow and we kind of are in a place once we come down. But it's a good unit. So them coming down is pretty cool. So that's probably the part that I think I would be most interested in seeing, how it changes Death Guard lists if you start to see more of those units.
It's pretty wild that I'm happy to pay 30 points for a Deathwing Companion or a Blade Guard, and one more point gets me a Blight Lord Terminator in this army. So it's pretty exciting.
Fair, though, you do more damage than a Blight Lord Terminator. They
are
true. 4 attacks at damage 1, strength 5.
It's true. But some of them have a gun. Some have a gun.
Some of them have a gun.
All right. Yes, you get You get Deathwatch, mate. How excited are you?
The Deathwatch Veteran came down 10. Watchcard Artist came down 10. I still don't know what he does, and I refuse to learn. And the Watchmaster came down 10 while also having his Lord of Deceit aura gained. Deathwatch Veterans are fine battle line units. Like, you could play a Deathwatch Gladius or Firestorm list and run Deathwatch Veterans, and it's going to be fine. It's not going to be like the most interesting thing in the world. It's hilarious that you can run a Proteus kill team that's 80 points more expensive, and all you do is change your special rule and lose an OC for the same 5 Space Marines. But, that's neither here nor there. Deathwatch, these are, we need to change something so that Deathwatch players don't complain as loudly as last time, maybe.
Yeah, fair. It's something. They actually changed a thing, which is more than I expected them to do.
Deathwatch, they changed.
Yay. Brian, you get Drukhari.
So for Drukhari, we saw Ravagers drop another 5 points, and then Grotesques dropped, I want to say 10 and 20 points for 3 and 6, if I remember correctly.
10 and 20.
Yeah, and then we saw Scourges for the 5-man unit go up, I believe it was 10 points. So Ravagers coming down seems fine. It's a okay shooting platform. It looks, I think, a lot better than it actually is in practice. I know about you guys, but every time I've ever rolled a Ravager, I hit 3 times and I wound once, and then they make the save. So one of the few things in this book that can at least pretend to hold an objective through a shooting phase, which is kind of interesting. So them coming down is good. I think one of the big problems they have is they can't fit a big squad into a Raider, and that hasn't changed.
Yeah.
And then Scourges are paying the fact that they have pointy ears, and sometimes your brain shows up at a battlefield and says, "Come over here." That's why they went up. So which I think is a good change in the context of Eldar, and it's an unfortunate change in the context of Drukhari, but I think it was necessary.
Yeah, I think it's necessary as well, but it's one of those ones that feels bad for the Drukhari mains. It's like, we're copying it for the sins of their allies. I'm going to skew my turn so that Inez gets GSC, because I want to hear him lament.
Okay.
Go on.
So, Aberrants came down 30 while also losing a point of strength, a point of damage, a point of feel no pain, and the ability to go back into reserve, and, the joy in their eyes and the light of happiness. Acolytes hybrids with all pistols came down 15, which I think is fine. Biofigures came down 10, the real life Ork came down 10, Galactron came down 5, and then the hybrids came down 20, and the Kellamorph went up 5. Kellamorph changing was fine. Acolyte Argomorph is a little bit more.
Sorry, 1 sec.
Sorry, no worries.
What is that noise in the background? Is someone typing, or is that somebody washing a brush?
I think it might have been me typing there. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself. Sorry.
No, so you get continue, Inez.
Broadly, all of the changes are fine in isolation. It is the sum total of the changes that probably results in just not quite being enough for the state that the New Center Club launched at. Aberrants at 150. Again, you can compare them to the Blight Lord Terminators we were just talking about, and note that they are 5 points cheaper. Overall, I think the kind of, as we spoke about with Custodes, the stripping of everything interesting in the index detachment and splitting it across the 4 detachments while replacing it with very little kind of happened to cults as well. And there's just not a whole lot of direction here. With things like the bikes being 90 points, it's just, what are you meant? How are you meant to build Outlander, Outlander Claw? Yeah, Outlander Claw reasonably. With the the Rock Grinder being 120, but still being fairly neophytes don't really do anything at 70 points. There's just not a lot of things to do in Gene Circles. There's no uppy downy really anymore outside of some very, very isolated situations. The blips mechanic is. We went from having units coming back automatically to coming back on a 3, 4, or 5, depending on the game state, to now always being a 5. And I get that it's difficult to price a unit on the fact that it might be 1.5 units. It's 1.3 units, and then that unit might come back a little bit more. But, we're still pricing them as if they come back on a 3 up and they come back on a 5 up. And it's just not a good army mechanic. I think it just needed to go. And nothing, give them a real rule that makes them do something.
Nothing here is pointed aggressively. And that's my biggest issue. There's nothing
I would argue
here.
The Kellamorph and the Ridge Runner absolutely are, and then nothing else is.
Well, that's nothing you can build around, right? You're not going to build your army around 3 Kellamorphs.
Yeah, that's that's 500. That's 630 points. Godspeed with the rest of it.
But yeah, that's what I mean. There's nothing here to get excited about building an army into. There's nothing here to be like, oh yeah, I can build this archetype. It's just everything is just kind of beige and various shades of beige. I mean, I wanted to be excited about 30-point aberrants, but they're not exciting.
If this was 30-point index aberrants that just didn't have the Ascension Day stuff, right? You couldn't
Muscle
be down to them. They didn't have the infiltrate, right? If they were just like they were the index data sheet, but they had less flexibility for getting there. They were a little more reliant on hitting charges or playing like the Biosanctic Brood Surge. I'd have been like, 30 is more than fair. I'd have been happy at 32, you know? But at 30, with the profile they have now, I would probably not be happy until they were 20 points, maybe 25. Like, they're just 10 to 15% too expensive.
Yeah, for a unit without a save, and now without a, gangbusters field damage output. Yeah. All right. Grey Knights saw increases to the Land Raider Redeemer, which you'll see echoed in Space Marines as well. Storm Raven's up. Castellan Crow, I don't know who he bad touched, but he's up also. And then Dread Knights and GMDKs both went up a not insignificant amount of points. Suffice to say that I think the 6 Dread Knight list is still alive and kicking. You've lost a little more periphery units. But you can still definitely pull that lever. Land Raider Redeemers are definitely for 285. I doubt you're doing the triple Redeemer, but also screw you, and I'm not sad. Anything to say in addition for Grey Knights to either of you lads?
No, I think you could probably put Red Knights up more.
Yeah, I agree. 205 and 210. I for the GM and then the regular, I think you could go up another 10, and you'd still maybe take the 6. I think just fine.
The Grandmaster also gets much more interesting too with the new strat changes.
Yes, he does indeed, mate. All right, Brian, you're up next for Imperial Knights.
So we saw all the detachments, a couple of detachments, go down. Mysterious Guardian, Reverend Knight. Couple of the Forge World Knights went down, and so did the Paladin. Big Knights go through wall, good. So they're cheaper. Yeah. That's interesting. We'll have to kind of see how it shakes out. I think they are still have the inherent problems that all Knight armies have of being a skew army, and sometimes you run into one too many las cannons.
I do think the Atropos at 425 is pretty attractive. I like the Atropos there. But a lot of people are talking about the Lancer at 430. I think the Atropos at 5 points less outshines the Lancer quite a lot, and I do think it's a very, very attractive pick. All right, Leagues of Votan is unfreaking changed. Does anyone want to tell me if that's good or bad or just fine?
There's actually not changed.
We had a new unit. That is correct.
Yep.
The Hearthkin Jaegers, 10 models for 80 points, and they are a freaking good unit, and a lot of what Votan is missing. Apologies.
That's price point for that unit.
Dude, they are everything that Gene Stillicott wished they had. That is a brand new unit that adds a huge dynamic to that army. That's pointed aggressively as hell. Take as many as you can get your hands on. I think there's no wrong number. I think 0 is the only wrong number of Jaegers in a Votan's list.
I mean, and just adding an infiltrate army to an army like Votan, where they have the ability to scout, it's just really powerful. It gives them their ability to alpha strike.
Yep.
Real credibility in any kind of a game. So, and that opens all kinds of options for them. And 80 points, as we said, is so cheap.
In addition, I've seen so many Votan players get run over by Wolf Jail and World Eaters because they had no ability to stop the Lord Invocatus a lot of the time, just sending units straight into the jugular, straight into their best units. And because you have no great meat shield, like there's no 20-man crew unit to line in front of your line and absorb stuff. You just every unit you lose is something you're going to miss. Like any Sagittar is awful. The Jaegers being added is just freaking crazy for giving them some life. Inez, anything to add?
Yeah, I think Jaeger might be one of like the 10 best data sheets in the game at 80 points. They're phenomenal.
Agreed. Well, continuing with you, Inez, Necrons.
Yeah, so 2 changes for Necrons and 1 notable absence. The Canoptic Doomstalker came out 10 points, the Canoptic Wraiths came up 15 or 3, and the Canoptic Acanthrites vanished from contention.
Tomb Sentinel as well.
Legal data sheet. And I'm sure that's a thing that people played.
All I know is that Siegel is in the process of building and painting 3. Take that.
Sucks. The Canoptic Acanthrites and the loan up changes probably contribute more than I think the point changes do here, but
Agreed.
Going up 90 points on the standard Wraith build and then another 20 for the Doomstalkers limits you're going to have to cut a squad of your scoring units. You're going to have to cut a squad of screening units, or obviously you can now fill the points that your Katan Knights had. But you're going to be replacing them with flayed ones that don't interact, don't give you damage output increases, don't interact with your your rerolls or your reactive moves. Just very meaningful change for Corrupted Core that I think now to completely fine. I think for me the miss here is I really feel like the Monolith needed to go up again, but I'm so sick of playing against 3 Monolith lists. But
fair. I had a mate who was taking two units of 3 Scarabs, and he was joking that he just drops the Scarabs and he's just fine because the Scarabs are worse now anyway because they don't do any actions. Suffice to say that's still pretty good though. If they lose a lot of their utility units and have to play, the similar list, that still works.
There's anything wrong with Court being a viable build, right? Like it's not like Court is. With the changes, I don't think Court is anywhere near as oppressive as it used to be. There's a lot more answers for it. Plus, people have just gotten more used to playing against Canoptic Court over the course of time. Yeah. That I now think it's fine that Wraiths is a build. It might be a little obnoxious that it's high durability, but it's not like it's a thing it plays pretty fair Warhammer at you. Like it walks at you, it doesn't do a ton of damage, it scores pretty well, it's pretty durable. But like with the loan up changes, there's a lot more interaction access now, and it doesn't have the insane infiltrate threat of here is 6 Wraiths and 6 Acanthrites in your deployment zone turn 1. You now need to deal with this while I position. You now just have that, it's a Wraith squad. If you can't deal with a Wraith squad doing that, then you have either misbuilt your army or misdeployed.
Yeah, agreed.
I think another important element of this is the mission change. And that Wraiths are no longer able to sit on objectives and do cleanse homers with their pistols well engaged and not have to worry about it, right? So that adds a real complexity or a real way for you to attack their score sheet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really well pointed out there. And we've lined this up perfectly that Brian gets Orcs. Take it away.
So Snickrot went up a little bit. Meganobs took the Hammer of God, went up to 240 for 6 of them. So that's plus 10 points per model. Pain Boys went up, so the Pain Boss and the Weird Boy went up a little bit. So essentially you have 2 to 3 characters that are intended for Green Tide went up a little bit. Meganobs went up quite a bit, about 33%, and then Snickrot, who was probably a little underpriced for what he was doing, went up a bit too. I think maybe the Meganob change was a bit too hard considering the 5-up change.
Yep.
I think it probably should have been somewhere in the middle. 180 was still too cheap for him. 240 is a bit too much. Maybe it should have been somewhere around the 210 mark, I think. Maybe even 220, but 240 feels a bit much for them. Otherwise, the rest of these changes feel good. Snickrot is very good for what he does. He's alone up, an army doesn't have it. Anytime you have some kind of an ability that isn't elsewhere in a given army, it tends to be quite strong. And then, the Weird Boy's ability was incredibly good. Worse now that you don't have the plus battle round charge ability, but still very, very strong. And then, 5-up Fiona Pains and big units is very good. And they were underpriced for what they did. So besides the Meganobs, I think they really hit this. And even with the Meganobs, I don't think they're too far off. Maybe just a bit too high.
I mean, there's still some very aggressively pointed units here. Knobs for 21 points for a Knob is still pretty good. Zodrog not getting touched, Gretchen not getting touched, Boys not getting touched, I think can all just be taken as wins and just be like, oh, woof, thank God for that, because that would have been some big death knell points changes.
Yeah, there were some significant FAQ changes that impact.
True. Yeah, absolutely.
The main one being War Bosses, but for the Knob instance there.
All right, Space Marines up next. Redeemers, Gladiator Reapers, and Valiants both up, echoing similar points in other ones. Repulsor is down to 180. A Repulsor for 180 points, I think, is extremely attractive, and I would not be surprised to see them possibly in some lists take the place of the Land Raider Redeemer for 280. 105 points less for the Repulsor when it, technically shoots harder, apart from not having the same Overwatch threat, but at much better range, and then has some cute abilities as well. Storm Raven is also up quite a few points. The Ironstorm Spearhead enhancements that got changed from auras are now down and reduced in points by a bit as well. But overall, I think Space Marines went by pretty medium of the pack of the nerfs. The most of the nerfs came to the Ironstorm. If you weren't playing the Ironstorm, you're playing a Gladius. The only noticeable change is the fact that you're paying more for your Land Raider Redeemer. You're now paying 285. And in all honesty, I still take it 285. Don't really care. I'd probably take one at 300. It's that good in some builds. Gentlemen, I suppose Inez, I'll hit it to you. Anything big out of this, or is what I said pretty on the money?
All sadness for Space Marines, right? Like, if you were just playing your normal Space Marines Gladius build, you copped, you're playing like a couple of tanks and a Land Raider, and you went up 40 points, you gained nothing. You can put an extra dude in your Impulsor now for the Blade Guard you weren't taking. Cool.
Yep.
What are you meant to do with this as a Space Marine player?
I wish, yeah, exactly right. I mean, there are some things that they just can't reduce points on. Like an Intercessor cannot, and Assault Intercessor cannot come down in points anymore from where they are at 16 points a model, etc. But there's stuff like, they could have reduced Devastators. They could have reduced some of the Dreadnoughts. They could have reduced some of the characters. There is a lot they could have done here that they didn't. But the sum total is it's virtually the same as it was. And the fact is you still, I believe, have some of the best utility units in the games. I think Inceptors and Scouts are still ridiculous and possibly, top tier for what they do. But yeah, you're right. They could have done a lot more to, once again, widen the amount of units that are takeable in this army. And they did not.
Yep. And it's just kind of, I don't understand how you're meant to play Space Marines without an additional chapter. I don't outside of exactly. I think Adrax and Vulcan are pretty compelling, but even that build cop nerfs. So there's nothing here. There is no reason to play Codex Space Marines. That's ultimately what this comes down to.
Yep, I do agree with that. Continuing through NS specials.
Yep, Thunderwolf Cavalry up 10 per 3, Wolfen up 10 per 5. Completely reasonable changes. Thunderwolves were very obnoxious at the points that they were, way too cheap. Wolfen, the same thing. I think Wolfen probably maybe didn't need this, just relative to the not being able to do actions anymore through being OC0, but whatever. I think it would have been better if that 10 points had been on Thunderwolves, and they went up to 110 per 3, but whatever. Notably as well, Space Wolves in any detachment can no longer take Apothecaries, so if you're playing like Space Wolf Gladius, you can't have the Apothecary Biologist plus either Aggressors or Eradicators combo, which is a very, very relevant change.
Yeah, that's actually quite a decent nerf, in all honesty, and probably pushing people a little. And that plus the Redeemer change probably pushes people a little bit further towards the Wolf Jail, even with the points changes. Tau for you, Brian.
So we saw broadsides come down for 1 and 2 models, or all versions came down, but 1 and 2 models came down to their original points cost of 90 and 180. 3 models are still at 300 points to kind of prevent that spamming. Cold Stars and Enforcers came down, and all 3 Crisis variants came down, while the Hammerhead went up a smidge. Strike Team also came down a little. I think these are good changes. Hammerhead was underpriced at 130. At 145, it feels more in line with where it probably should be. The Crisis suits are really interesting at their price point now. They were probably a bit too expensive before. There's a very real possibility these are a bit too cheap, but they're not so cheap that you were 100% spamming them. So it's just at an interesting point cost where you want to look at them and see if they're any good. So that's pretty cool. Broadsides, I'm not spending 300 points for 3 of them. Now when they lost from the index their ability to fall back and shoot, they just become too easy to kind of control from your opponent. So hoping they'll come down again at some point, but still not really that interesting to me. But overall, these are good changes for Tau. They probably come out about equal with the wash. If you were taking Hammerheads before, and you're looking at maybe taking some Crisis suits now, you probably gain about as much as you lose. The army kind of stays about where it was.
I think
Inez, anything to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the more compelling thing for Tau is the conjunction of this with the Bring It Down changes, where if you wanted to play a squad of Starsides with a commander was 8 Bring It Down before now. If you caught one of your shield generator or your shield drones and you play that unit as 14 wounds, that combined unit goes up 4 now. So you're halving its output. Yes, you lose 1 shield drone, so you only have 14 wounds in the squad rather than 15, but it means that you can have a much more compelling 3-inch deep strike unit in Retaliation cadre, or a much faster unit that you can throw about in Monka and not be as upset if it ends up taking some damage and dying, because you're not just hemorrhaging points. And you're going to play a much fairer game with people now.
There's always the ability to bait people into taking Bring It Down and playing Keep Away with what are not very expensive units. If someone took a Bring It Down versus you and you just decided to keep your 400 points of Crisis suits jumping around your backfield instead of deep striking on your front field to not give up their points, you're laughing. You're actually probably pretty happy with that. So I think Crisis suits are extremely attractive now.
Yeah, I think the biggest miss here is probably the Kroot stuff, particularly.
Same. Oh my god, it's such a miss.
Shaper that has the free stratagem to bring himself back constantly, and not being able that being once per game now, just it really diminishes some of the crew options as well. I don't think we've spoken about it at all, but along with some of the generic rules changes, like the indirect always missing in a 1 to 3, is the all redeploys are now before the turn roll. Another massive hit to that crew detachment. It definitely affects some of the other things we've spoken about as well. But crew, I think, struggled the most from it because crew are very, very much dependent on like that infiltrate and scout and flexibility. And now you just can't do that. Like that just doesn't work. So you have to commit much earlier, and that is going to lower the ceiling of that build, which I think is. I don't think it was the best build in the book, but it was definitely a compelling and interesting thing that you could do. And now you're much more heavily punished for trying to. And there was no compensation here by making stuff like, you could have made Rampagers a little bit cheaper or something like that.
Absolutely.
To give you some output in that detachment when you did commit and get it right.
Tau definitely does have the best detachment enhancement, I think, in the game now, which is the Retaliation Cadre's most expensive enhancement at 25 points is a Pure Tide Engram Chimp, which just says can be placed on a Tau battleship model, and it does nothing because of the strat changes. It just has no ability.
So good. So good. I do agree.
For Uriel Ventress, Brian's favorite character. So I think it's just whatever happens, whatever Brian likes gets murdered.
They're hunting Brian. I do agree. Every single crew model in this army could have gone down in points, in my opinion, in this book. Could have gone down 8 points, 5 points, whatever. But yeah, every single one of them. All right, 1,000 Suns have seen reductions to the Exalted Sorcerer on disc, the Mutalith Vortex Beast, which I actually think is quite cute at 150. I think that's quite interesting. And then a Scarab Cult Terminators going down a couple of points as well. 380 now for 10. But they take the -2 rather than the deletion of your armor save a lot better when they have, the double Reapers, double missiles. They take it a lot better, but still 380 is a big ask. But I do actually think the Vortex Beast, I played against a couple of Vortex Beasts and they didn't feel stupid at their previous points cost, but a single one for 150 or a double for 300, I think feels it feels quite interesting. Anything to add, gents, on the 1,000 Suns, Brian?
No, I mean, I think they probably didn't need any points decreases.
I agree.
To be honest. I don't think the Scarab Cult Terminator one is interesting, but I think it's not enough to make you take them, as you said.
Yeah.
But yeah, they didn't really need any. I understand why. With the Exalted Sorcerer, right? He did objectively get worse, but again, the army was in a good spot, so you probably just leave him where he's at, and then that's all you change. But yeah.
Fair enough. Tyranids for Lovely Inez.
Yeah, so a few changes here, broadly all good. The Bioware came down 25, mostly representing the fact that it generates spore mines that can't do actions anymore, which was the reason it was 75 points in the first place. Completely fine at 50 points. It still has the only one Bioware unit per turn can make a spore mine, so still a pretty reasonable restriction. Completely reasonable data sheet for sitting in your backfield. Happy with that. Nuclear Spore came down 20, and you will never notice because I don't think anyone will ever put one on the table outside of Blunderdome. The Neural Litter came up 10, representing the fact that it now has the Synapse keyword, which is completely fine. Ripper Swarms came down at the top values, but up at the bottom values. Again, not able to do actions. I think it's actually kind of weird they went up to 25 points.
Yeah.
A single deep striking model with OC0 doesn't really feel worth 25 points, but I guess you can not run them more now. The Turbulent came down 15, which I think is super interesting. It's a very durable model for the points. Still has some limitations like Endless Swarm getting hit pretty hard, not being able to infinitely regenerate. So the Turbulent gives you some good interesting options there. Outside that, it's like it benefits pretty well from holding some of the bigger enhancements in the game, like the -1 damage in Nexus or the 5 Field and Invasion Fleet, which does give you it's a very resilient model to kind of carry that, but it does compete in the same slot with things like the Hive Tyrant that are giving you a bit more marginal utility while having a bit less durability. So you're weighing that up. Like she's a lot cheaper, she has higher toughness, better OC, and a much more compelling price point. But the Hive Tyrant is going to give you that lethal hits on everything, not just Termagants, etc., etc. Outside that, no real changes. None really needed. I think everything here feels like we're going to see a new wave of understanding of Tyranids. I think the only things that I would have liked to see go down a little bit were the Norns, because they are really goddamn expensive and they're my favorite dish. It's one of my favorite models. I think you could have probably seen them come down 20-ish points and probably still not really been touching the threshold where they're playable. They are at least now, finally we have crossed the threshold. An Emissary is now cheaper than a Land Raider, but not because they got cheaper, because the Land Raider went up.
I expected when I read, because of course I read the slate before the points, I expected to see a bunch more of the monsters be aggressively pointed. Like I would not have been surprised to see Swarmlord down, to see things like Toxicreens down. Maybe not stuff like the Trigon and the Morlocks, but 120%. I would not have been surprised to see 20 points on both the Norns. And the fact that they didn't do that is actually a little interesting.
I think the last thing that's worth noting here is the 2 hero duels both left as well.
Both went deleted,
which I think is a shame as well, because those
pull one out.
Big and unplayable models on the same basis as a Great and Clean one that you were never going to see anyway. And the fact, so it doesn't really matter that they've gone. I guess you could use, if you rebase one, you could use one as a Tyrannifex now.
Yeah. All right. Last one is for Brian. World Eaters, mate.
So here we just saw the 8-bound and Exalted 8-bound drop a couple points. I think this is specifically because the GW people couldn't stand Anthony playing a list that was 1975. So they just tried to slip in something to force them to take another unit. I mean, I don't know that they needed to go down. I don't know if this is going to wildly impact their win rate. It's probably fine.
You get like a Spawn or a Jackal squad now.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, you get something small in. It's gonna have an impact, but it's not gonna be something which is gonna rock it.
It's good for World Eaters. Good for you. It's just a bonus. It is net.
I mean, if you go the full hog 8-bound list that we've definitely seen some people doing the 3 squads of 6 8-bound, Exalted 8-bound, and then like 6 3/3 of Exalted, you are meaningfully gaining like 150 points in that list now.
Yeah,
and that's something that we've seen people playing before. I know like Matt Robertson from Team England was playing that for a while, and doing fairly well with it. So it's obviously like there are options there that you don't just have to play when Anthony plays World Eaters players. I know that might be against your religion, but it's worth noting. But there are other things you can play, and maybe that's a direction that's worth exploring now with just gaining a bunch of points on the unit that you were probably spamming anyway.
Agreed. All right, gentlemen, that is the end of the MFM review, and hopefully you've enjoyed your 2 hours and 10 minutes of Art of Well Done Under Goodness. When you have 3 people on and you want to hear from at least 2 of them on every faction, it does tend to inflate things a bit. But hopefully that's been a good time and been a good experience for you. We're going to do our roundup, and then we will be out of here. And of course, I'll let these gentlemen plug their wares as well. For my totality, I think this is a pretty good. I think this is about a 7 out of 10 MFM for me. Big misses here being Blood Angels being untouched, but like we said, the points are on a knife edge to such an extent that I think you are kind of correct, Brian, that there isn't much you can really slap them with. Astra Militarum not getting anywhere near enough buffs points wise to compensate them for the fact that they probably lost about 40% of the faction's power. Apart from that, I guess Chaos Space Marines got heavy-handedly touched. But apart from that, everything else seems pretty fair to me. Inez, we'll start with you.
Yeah, about the same. I think every faction that got major changes, it feels like they kind of got it right. A lot of the factions that got GSC didn't, yeah. Most of the factions that got major changes, so that would be like Sisters, Admech, I think...
CSM, yeah.
CSM, CSM is the only one that I really feel like they got that wrong. Everything else feels like there was at least like a pretty reasonable approach here of doing some cool things. Some of the ones where it feels like there was a lot of the right nerfs here, outside of exactly maybe 1,000 Sons of Blood Angels, but not a lot of the right buffs. Right, that's the thing that I think was kind of missing here, and it feels weird because if you're scrolling through it, there's a lot of change for the positive here, but just some of the mid-range stuff for demons, some of the buffs for Chaos Space Marines not existing, nothing for Space Marines, nothing for Tau compensation wise. Genius Cult's not really getting proper direction from their buffs. I think there's a lot of there could have been a little bit more pushing up of the bottom end here. But I think the Dataslate did a pretty good job of giving more of that. So I feel like the totality across both of them is pretty reasonable. Again, exactly outside of 1,000 Sons of Blood Angels. And I think that that's broadly fine. And we also, we know the 1 in 3 months is points only. So it feels reasonable to do smaller points update when you do the rules update to make sure there are no doubling down repercussions, which I think is fine as long as the change in assuming September or October catches the fail states.
Yeah, Brian, closing thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm basically in agreement with you guys. The parts where I feel like it was missed, besides the armies that were outlined, are the buffs. I think there's some spots where they could have had that be more targeted with how the army likes to play. But overall, this is a success. I think. I mean, it brought a fairly balanced meta, I think, into an even more balanced state, which is awesome. So that's all you want out of these things.
Fair enough. All right, gentlemen, time to plug your wares. Ines, tell us about your various things and stuff.
Yeah, so the main thing, you can catch me at StatCheck every Tuesday at 11 p.m. UK or various other times across the globe. You can listen to myself, along with Anthony, Jeremy, and Nathan in some combination, vamping about all things Warhammer, stats, and the meta, as well as what we've been getting up to, baking, and all the goods that go with that. So if you've liked hearing from me and you want to hear more from that, check that out at stat-check.com or youtube.com/statcheck. We would love to hear you. We have a ton of content from myself, as well as the other 11 wonderful people on the network. We'll have our own Dataslate coverage going live tomorrow or probably today as this comes out. So yeah, check it out.
Fantastic. Brian, anything you'd like to add?
I know Team USA has a couple sponsorship deals going on with FLG right now. So they released a set of WTC terrain, which does ship internationally. And I saw it in person this weekend. We had a Team USA in-person practice weekend. Where I flew across the ocean to play at Sean's house with a bunch of my friends, which was a weird experience for one weekend.
Nice.
Trip. But still very useful. And also, I saw that train in person for the first time, and it was the most gorgeous piece of trains that I've ever seen. And I'm not just saying this because we have a sponsorship deal with them. It is legitimately awesome. So check that out for some of the affiliate links. I think we also have something involving LVO tickets as well. So just, check it out. Support. This money goes to not just helping Team USA, but all WTC teams as well. We donate some of those proceeds in that direction. FLG donates some of those proceeds in that direction as well. So
lovely.
And if you want to follow Brian's actual event, it's the US Wargaming Federation on Facebook, right? If anybody wants to follow along with what you're going to be doing in the future, right?
Absolutely. Excellent.
Beautiful. All right. It is a beautiful 2 a.m. here in lovely Australia. We're going to go over and record part freaking 2 because the content train knows no breaks and has no mercy. So we will see you over there if you'd like to join us at Art of War Down Under over on Patreon. And thank you so much, Brian. Thank you so much, Ines, for coming on. Please feel free to say your good nights and good days.
Cheers.
Very much.
Thank you for listening to Art of War Down Under, a content review podcast for Warhammer 40K, hosted by Adam Camilleri, produced by Seamus Ronan. Enjoyed the show? Want your lists reviewed and the content you heard put into practice? Sign up to our Patreon and connect with us online or on Facebook. Just search for Art of War Down Under. Signing out from tomorrow.